The coffee tasted like every morning for the past 40 years. Black, no sugar, served in a white ceramic mug at Millie's Diner on Bragg Boulevard. The waitress knew not to ask anymore. She'd just pour and move on, leaving Colonel David Harrigan alone with his newspaper and the ghost that always found him before dawn. The mug was chipped on the left side. Same chip for 15 years. David always turned it so the chip faced away. Small ritual, meaningless. But rituals were what kept you tethered when the past tried to drag you under. Outside, Fort Bragg was waking up. The sound of boots on pavement, drill sergeants barking cadence, the distant pop of rifle fire from the qualification ranges. Sounds that had been the rhythm of his life since 1968, when he'd been 18 years old and stupid enough to believe war made you a man. 50 years, half a century of wearing the uniform, of following orders, of burying friends and training their replacements and trying not to think about the mathematics of how many men he'd sent into situations they didn't come back from. 12, that was the number. 12 students killed in action. He remembered every name, every face, every detail about how they died because someone somewhere had decided a mission mattered more than a life. He was 58 now. The uniform still fit, barely, though his hands shook more than they used to. Arthritis, the doctor said. Decades of recoil will do that. Squeeze a trigger 10,000 times and your body keeps the score. David folded the newspaper to the obituaries. Always read them first. Habit from too many years of losing people. 3 names today he didn't recognize. That was a good morning. The bell above the diner door chimed. David didn't look up. Didn't need to. He'd spent 34 years reading situations by sound alone. 2 men, military gait, one older and heavier. The older one carried himself like brass. The younger one was nervous. They stopped at his booth. David set down his coffee and looked up into the face of Major General Raymond Keller. 2 stars on the shoulder, 30 years of bureaucratic ambition in the eyes, and a manila folder in his hands that David knew, instantly and completely, was going to ruin his day. Colonel Harrigan, General. Keller didn't ask permission, just slid into the booth across from him while his aides stood at attention nearby. The folder landed on the table between them, next to the half-eaten eggs David had lost his appetite for. 48 hours from retirement, Keller said. Big party last night, lots of speeches about your distinguished service. David said nothing. When generals showed up at your breakfast, silence was the only smart play. Keller opened the folder. Satellite photos, terrain maps, a facility David didn't recognize, tucked into mountains that looked like Wyoming or Montana. And then a face he did recognize. A woman, early 30s, dark hair pulled back military tight, eyes that carried weight beyond her years. Captain Elena Torres. The name hit him like a rifle butt to the chest. You knew her father, Keller said. It wasn't a question. David's hand found the coffee mug, steadied himself. Marcus Torres, yes sir, long time ago. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. Keller ticked them off like grocery items. You served together in MACV, SOG. Classified operations that officially never happened. He taught you to shoot. He taught me a lot of things. Keller leaned back, studying him. Marcus Torres died 12 years ago. Training accident. IED demonstration gone wrong. You delivered the eulogy. David remembered. Standing in the rain at Arlington. The folded flag. Elena, 20 years old and hollow-eyed, watching them lower her father into the ground. He'd promised her quietly that if she ever needed anything, she could call. She never had. What's this about, General? Keller slid another photo across the table. The facility again. Closer angle. David could see operators on a firing range. Advanced equipment. Enough security to make it clear this wasn't standard training. Captain Torres runs a black budget program called Resonance. Off books, minimal oversight, buried in the Wyoming Rockies. She's been recruiting operators, older ones. Veterans who were medically retired, psychologically discharged, written off by the system. David kept his face neutral. Sounds like a second chance program. Sounds like a recruitment vector for foreign intelligence. Keller's voice went cold. 6 operators have disappeared from her facility in the last 8 months. No explanation, no bodies, just gone. And we've intercepted encrypted communications from her facility to servers in Macau. Macau, Chinese territory. David set down the mug carefully. You think she's turned? I think Marcus Torres's daughter is either selling classified sniper doctrine to the Chinese, or she's running an unsanctioned program that's getting American soldiers killed. Either way, It ends. Keller tapped the folder. You're going in. Evaluation officer. Routine training audit. You spend 2 weeks embedded, you assess the program, and you give me the truth. Sir, with respect, I retire in 2 days. Send someone younger. I'm sending someone Marcus Torres trusted. Someone his daughter might actually talk to. Keller's eyes narrowed. You owe him, Colonel. Everyone knows it. That's why you'll say yes. The words landed like they were meant to. David looked down at Elena's photo. She had Marcus's eyes. The same intensity that could read wind at 3,000 meters and see through a man's lies at 3 feet. What happens if I confirm your suspicions? Then I shut her down. Quietly. No trial, no publicity, just reassignment to a desk somewhere she can't do damage. Keller stood. But if you find she's actively selling secrets, that's treason, and treason has consequences. David thought about Marcus, thought about the promise he'd made in the rain 12 years ago, thought about the fact that in 48 hours he was supposed to be fishing in the Blue Ridge Mountains, finally at peace. When do I leave? 0600 tomorrow. My aide will brief you on the flight. Keller picked up the folder, then paused. Marcus Torres was a good soldier, one of the best I ever saw. But toward the end, he went off the rails, started believing his own legend, got reckless. David met his eyes. He saved my life 3 times. Then maybe you can save his daughter's career, if there's anything left to save. Keller left. His aide followed. The bell chimed again, and David was alone with his cold coffee and the weight of a mission he'd never wanted. He looked at the newspaper, the obituaries. Tomorrow, he thought, my name might be in there too. But tonight he had a promise to keep. The flight to Wyoming took 6 hours. David spent most of it pretending to read the mission brief while actually watching his new partner, a woman who'd introduced herself as Agent Lena Voss from JSOC's Counterintelligence Division. She was 29, maybe 30. Civilian clothes hiding a military bearing she couldn't quite erase. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that was trying to look casual but came off tactical. She'd spent the first 2 hours typing on an encrypted laptop, compiling what she called actionable intelligence, which as far as David could tell, meant turning human beings into data points. David had seen her type before. The new generation, the ones who'd grown up with computers and algorithms, and the certainty that if you collected enough data, you could predict anything, prevent anything, control anything. They'd never had to carry a wounded man through a jungle while bullets cut the air around them. Never had to make a decision where every option led to someone dying, and all you could do was choose which someone. Data didn't bleed, data didn't scream, data didn't have mothers who'd never forgive you. That made it easy to worship. 87% probability that Captain Torres is compromised, she said without looking up. Financial records show unusual cash deposits. Communication patterns match known espionage tradecraft. Psychological profile indicates high-functioning narcissism with anti-authoritarian tendencies. David stared out the window at clouds. You ever actually meet her? Don't need to. The data doesn't lie. Data doesn't bleed either. Voss finally looked at him. Colonel, I understand you have personal history with the Torres family, but this is an intelligence operation, not a reunion. Emotional attachment will compromise the mission. David thought about telling her that everything worth doing in this life required emotional attachment. That you couldn't lead soldiers without loving them, couldn't take a life without weighing it, couldn't serve without understanding what you were protecting. Instead, he said, how long you been in the military, Agent Voss? 8 years. Why? And you've already figured out that people are just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's impressive. She bristled. I deal in facts, Colonel, not sentiment. Facts. David nodded slowly. Here's a fact. Marcus Torres pulled me out of a tiger trap in Cambodia. Carried me 6 clicks through enemy territory with a bullet in his own leg. Didn't leave me behind, even though every fact said he should. So forgive me if I don't worship at the altar of your probability assessments. Voss went back to her laptop. They didn't speak for the rest of the flight. The helicopter dropped them at the facility just after sunset. David had seen a lot of military installations in 34 years. This one felt different. No parade ground, no flag ceremony. Just functional buildings tucked into a valley surrounded by peaks that looked like they could scrape heaven. Security was visible but not oppressive. Cameras, yes, but also windows. Fences, but not razor wire. It looked less like a prison and more like a place where people might actually want to be. A man waited for them on the landing pad. Late 50s, black, wearing fatigues with Master Sergeant stripes and a smile that belonged to someone who'd seen the worst and decided to laugh anyway. Colonel Harrigan, he extended a hand. Master Sergeant Roy Carver, welcome to Silverstone. David shook. The grip was firm, weathered. Combat hands. Sergeant Carver. Roy's fine, sir. We're pretty informal up here. He nodded at Voss. Agent Voss, Captain Torres is waiting in the command center. I'll walk you over. They followed him across the compound. David noticed operators moving between buildings. All older, 40s, 50s, even what looked like a couple in their 60s. They moved with purpose, but without the rigid formality of active duty bases. You were in Vietnam, David said. It wasn't a question. Carver glanced at him. Ia Drang, 65. You? Kay-san, 68. Something passed between them. The kind of recognition that didn't need words. They'd both been in hell. They'd both walked out. That made them brothers in a language the young couldn't speak. How long you been here, Roy? 3 years. Got medically retired in 2015. PTSD, they said. Couldn't hold a rifle without shaking. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lost both my sons in Iraq. Same IED, same patrol, 10 minutes apart. After that, I couldn't see the point of anything. David said nothing. What could you say to that? Captain Torres found me, Carver continued. Said her program was for soldiers the system threw away. Said if I was willing to try something different, she'd give me a reason to wake up in the morning. He stopped at a building marked Command. 3 years later, I'm still waking up, and I can hold a rifle again. He opened the door. The command center was smaller than David expected. No war room, no banks of screens, just a conference table, some maps on the wall, and a woman standing with her back to them, looking at a satellite photo of terrain David didn't recognize. Captain Torres, Carver said, Colonel Harrigan and Agent Voss. She turned. David had seen her photo, had known she'd look like Marcus, but the reality still hit him harder than he'd prepared for. Same dark eyes, same intensity, same way of looking at you like she could see the math of your soul. Colonel Harrigan. She stepped forward, offering her hand. My father spoke of you often. He said you were the best natural shooter he ever trained. David shook her hand, firm, professional, no tremor. Your father was being generous. He was the teacher. I was just stubborn enough to listen. Stubbornness runs in the family. A small smile. I assume General Keller told you I'm a traitor, a fool, or both. Voss stiffened. David kept his face neutral. He told me you're running an unorthodox program with minimal oversight. He wants an assessment, and you're here to provide one. Elena nodded. Fair enough, Agent Voss. I assume you're here to build a case for shutdown. Voss didn't flinch. I'm here to determine if classified material is being compromised. Then we want the same thing, transparency. Elena gestured to the table. Sit, I'll show you everything. But first I need to make one thing clear. She waited until they were seated. Carver stood by the door, arms folded. My father died trying to build something the military wasn't ready for. A training methodology that could save lives by teaching soldiers to work with their bodies instead of against them. The Pentagon buried it, called it pseudoscience, called him reckless. Her voice stayed level, but David heard the edge beneath. He died believing he'd failed. I spent 12 years proving he didn't. By recruiting broken soldiers, Voss said. By giving discarded soldiers a second chance. Elena met her eyes. Every operator here volunteered. Everyone passed psychological screening. Everyone signed informed consent, acknowledging the risks. And yes, some fail. Some can't handle the neural integration. When that happens, we don't hide them. We treat them. David leaned forward. General Keller mentioned 6 missing operators. 6 operators in voluntary psychiatric care. I'll take you to meet them tomorrow. Elena slid a folder across the table. Medical records, treatment plans, progress notes, all documented, all legal. Voss opened the folder, scanning. David watched Elena instead. You said your father died trying to build this. Official report said training accident, IED demonstration. Something flickered in Elena's eyes. Pain, yes, but something else. Something that looked like doubt. That's the official report. You don't believe it. She met his gaze. I believe my father was killed because he threatened people with a lot to lose. I just can't prove it. Yet. The word hung in the air, yet. Voss closed the folder. Captain, these records could be fabricated. Without independent verification, they're meaningless. Then verify them independently. I'll give you full access. Talk to anyone, inspect anything. The only thing I ask is that you give me 72 hours before you make your final assessment. 3 days to see what we've built. If after that you still think I'm a traitor, I'll surrender my command without contest. David studied her. This wasn't the behavior of someone hiding treason. This was the behavior of someone who believed absolutely in what she was doing. Show us, he said. Elena stood. Then let's start at the range. The walk took 15 minutes, long enough for David to notice details. Operators nodded at Elena with respect, not fear. Buildings were clean but not sterile. Someone had planted flowers near the mess hall. Small things, human things. The rifle range sat at the valley's edge, backed by mountains that climbed into twilight. Targets were set at intervals David's eyes couldn't quite track. 2,000 meters, 3,000, maybe more. A man stood at the firing line. Older, white beard, Texas drawl, cursing at a rifle that wasn't cooperating. He wore an eye patch over his left eye. "Griff," Elena called. The man turned, spotted David and grinned like he'd just found money in an old coat pocket. "Well, I'll be damned. Stone Harrigan." The nickname hit David like a ghost. Nobody had called him that in 15 years. Stone. Because he never showed emotion, never flinched, never broke. It had been a compliment once. Now it just felt like an accusation. David blinked, walked closer, and recognized him. Tim Griffin, Sergeant First Class. David had trained him 15 years ago at Fort Benning, taught him holdover calculations and windage adjustments, and how to control his breathing when everything was trying to kill you. Griff had been good, natural talent combined with work ethic, the kind of student instructors remembered. Then Fallujah happened, 2006. Griff lost his left eye to shrapnel from an IED, lost his depth perception, lost his ability to judge distance, lost his career because the military had decided that snipers needed two functioning eyes, and no amount of skill could overcome biology. David had written a letter of recommendation for his medical retirement, had attended the ceremony where they'd thanked Griff for his service and handed him a flag and a pension in the unspoken understanding that his usefulness was over at 42 years old. That had been 9 years ago. Griff, Jesus, I thought you were retired. Was. Medically. Spent 5 years drinking myself to death in Abilene. Wife left. Kids stopped calling. Woke up one morning with a gun in my hand and couldn't remember loading it. Griff's voice was matter of fact, no self-pity, just stating facts. Then Captain Torres showed up at my door, said she could teach me to shoot again. Told her she was crazy, can't shoot with one eye, can't judge distance, can't compensate for depth perception loss. Every instructor I ever had said it was impossible. It is impossible, David said, by every standard we teach. Traditional standards, Elena corrected. She stepped beside Griff. Show him, Sergeant. Griff chambered around in the Barrett. Heavy rifle, serious weapon. The kind that kicked hard enough to bruise even when you had two eyes to anchor your perspective. David looked down range, saw a target, squinted. Distance was hard to judge in this light, with mountains creating false perspective. How far is that? 2,800 meters. David did the math automatically. Over 1.5 miles. In this wind, with elevation changes, with the curvature of the earth starting to matter at that distance, hitting a stationary target was difficult even for elite shooters with perfect vision. Hitting it with one eye was fantasy. That's impossible in this wind. Yep, Griff smiled. Same easy grin David remembered from Benning. That's what makes it fun. Griff settled into position. David watched his form, unorthodox. His breathing wasn't the controlled pattern David had taught. It was rhythmic, almost musical. The shot cracked across the valley. 3 seconds later, the sound of impact echoed back. Carver, watching through binoculars, called out, "Center mass." David stared. "Griff, you don't have depth perception." "Don't need it, Colonel. Not when you let your body find the rhythm." He tapped his chest. "Heart beats a metronome, wins a song. You don't calculate it. You feel it." Voss spoke up. "That's not possible. Sniper doctrine requires precise mathematical calculation." "Traditional doctrine," Elena said. "Resonance protocol teaches something different. We don't fight the body, we synchronize with it." She gestured to another operator. A woman, late 50s, Marine Corps bearing despite the civilian clothes. Captain Sharon Weiss, Force Recon, 3 tours in Afghanistan, medically retired for PTSD after watching her spotter die. Weiss stepped to the line, loaded her rifle with movements that were simultaneously casual and precise. "Target's moving," Carver said. 3,200 meters, winds gusting 20 knots. Weiss breathed. Once, twice. On the third exhale, she fired. The target, a silhouette on a motorized track, rang like a bell. That's a 40-year-old woman, Voss said, hitting a moving target at 2 miles in variable wind. That doesn't happen. It does here, Elena said quietly, because we stopped telling soldiers their bodies were obstacles and started teaching them to listen. David watched another operator take the line, then another. Different ages, different backgrounds. Every one of them hitting shots that should have been impossible. And every one of them looked like they'd been thrown away by the same system that had used them up. Colonel, Elena said, I know what General Keller told you. I know you came here expecting to find a rogue operation run by Marcus Torres's unstable daughter. But I need you to see the truth. These people aren't compromised. They're resurrected. David looked at Griff, at Weiss, at Carver, who was smiling like he'd found something worth protecting again. The 6 missing operators, he said. I want to see them. Tonight. Elena nodded. Follow me. The medical wing was separate from the main compound. Smaller building, softer lighting, the kind of place designed for healing instead of training. A man in civilian clothes met them at the entrance. Late 40s, Korean-American, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent years talking people down from ledges. Colonel Harrigan, Agent Voss, this is Dr. James Park. He runs our psychiatric care program. Park shook hands. Captain Torres briefed me. You want to see the operators who couldn't complete training. The missing operators, Voss corrected. They're not missing, Agent. They're recovering. Park led them down a hallway. Resonance protocol works by teaching the brain to synchronize physiological rhythms with environmental patterns. For most people, it's transformative. For about 15%, the neural integration causes dissociative episodes. Severe ones. He stopped at a door. We don't hide that, we treat it. Inside, a man sat in a chair by the window. Early 40s, Latino, staring at mountains painted orange by sunset. Corporal Danny Ortiz, Park said softly. Marines, suffered severe dissociation during week 3 of training. Couldn't distinguish between present and past. Couldn't remember his own name for 72 hours. David stepped closer. Corporal? Ortiz turned, his eyes focused slowly. Sir, you volunteered for this program? Yes, sir. Was told there were risks. And now you're here, broken. Ortiz smiled, sad but real. No, sir. Healing. Captain Torres didn't abandon us when the protocol failed. She saved us, got us the best treatment, paid for it herself when the VA wouldn't. Voss frowned. Paid for it how? Her salary, Park said. Every cent she makes goes into medical care for operators who can't complete training. She takes nothing for herself. They visited 4 more rooms. 4 more operators in various stages of recovery, all said the same thing. Captain Torres hadn't hidden them, hadn't erased them. She'd kept her promise to take care of them when the system wouldn't. Back in the hallway, David turned to Elena. Your father tried to rush this, pushed too hard, didn't account for the human cost. You learned from that. I learned that legacy is worthless if it kills the people it's meant to save. She met his eyes. He died trying to prove a concept. I'm trying to perfect a practice. Slowly, carefully, with full accountability for every failure. Voss pulled out her phone, frowned. I need to make a call. Encrypted line. Communications building is across the compound, Carver said. I'll show you. They left. David and Elena stood alone in the hallway. You don't trust me, Elena said. You came here thinking I'd betrayed my father's memory. I came here because General Keller ordered me to, and because I made your father a promise at his funeral. What promise? David looked at her, really looked, and saw not Marcus's daughter, but a soldier trying to do right by people everyone else had given up on. That if you ever needed anything, I'd be there. I don't need anything, Colonel, except for you to see the truth before you write your report. Then show me more. She studied him for a long moment. Tomorrow, 0600, meet me at the range. Just you. No Agent Voss, no observers. I'll show you what resonance protocol really is. David nodded. I'll be there. She started to leave, then paused. My father kept a journal. Did you know that? I knew. He wrote about you, about Cambodia, about the night you almost died and he carried you out. He saved my life. He wrote that you saved his soul, that when everyone else treated war like a sport, you treated it like a burden. That's why he trusted you. She looked back at him. I need to know if I can trust you too. Before David could answer, she was gone. He stood in the hallway, surrounded by the ghosts of soldiers no one else wanted, and thought about the promise he'd made, and the one he was about to break. Later that night, David sat alone in the quarters they'd assigned him. Simple room, military cot, window looking out at mountains that disappeared into darkness. His phone buzzed. Encrypted message from Voss. Trace the Macau communications. Origin point is inside the facility. Someone here is feeding data to unknown recipients. We'll have location narrowed by morning. David typed back, "Don't act until I clear it." Her response was immediate. "We have a job to do, Colonel. Sentiment can't interfere." He set down the phone, thought about data and facts and probability assessments. Thought about Griff hitting impossible shots with one eye. Thought about Danny Ortiz, recovering in a room paid for by a captain's salary. Thought about Elena Torres carrying her father's legacy with the kind of care Marcus never had. His hands shook. Arthritis, or maybe just age catching up to all the violence he'd done in the name of duty. Tomorrow, he'd see what resonance protocol really was. Tonight, he'd try to remember what honor meant when the orders stopped making sense. Outside his window, a lone figure moved across the compound. Elena Torres, walking to the range at midnight, probably to do what soldiers always did when they couldn't sleep. Practice for a war that never ended. David closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. It never did anymore, not with so many ghosts still waiting to be heard. Dawn came to the Wyoming mountains the way it always did. Slowly, like the light was uncertain about what it might reveal. David Harrigan stood at the edge of the rifle range at 0530, watching the peaks turn from black to purple to gold, and thought about all the mornings he'd watched the sun rise over places he couldn't name in countries that officially didn't exist. Cambodia, Laos, places where the maps lied and the only truth was the man next to you with a rifle. Marcus Torres had been that man. 35 years ago, Marcus had been the one teaching an 18-year-old kid from North Carolina that shooting wasn't about anger or fear. It was about breath and patience and understanding that every trigger pull was a conversation with physics and fate. Now Marcus was dead, and his daughter was walking toward David across the morning frost, carrying 2 rifles and a promise she might not be able to keep. Elena Torres moved like her father, same economy of motion, same way of existing in space that suggested she'd calculated every angle before she got there. She wore standard fatigues with no rank displayed, no unit patch, nothing to indicate she was anything other than another soldier trying to make it through another day. She handed David one of the rifles. Barrett Mare D, top-tier precision instrument, the kind of weapon that costs more than his first car. "No spotter," she said, "no technology. Just you, the rifle, and what your body already knows." David checked the weapon. Habit from 4 decades of not dying because he checked the weapon. "What am I shooting at?" Elena pointed downrange. David could barely make out the target, a silhouette maybe, dark shape against darker mountain. 2,200 meters. Winds coming cross from the northwest at about 15 knots. Temperatures 41 degrees. Barometric pressures dropping because there's weather coming in from the Tetons. David did the math in his head. Windage, elevation, Coriolis effect at this distance. His hands started calculating holdover before his brain caught up. "Traditional method says you compensate for all those variables," Elena continued. "You turn yourself into a machine, slow your heart, hold your breath, make your body stop being human so the math works. That's how I was taught." "I know. My father taught you." She settled into position on the mat next to him. But in the last year of his life, he discovered something. What if the body isn't the problem? What if it's the solution? David looked at her. "You're going to have to explain that." "Get into position. I'll show you." He went prone, legs at 45 degrees, exactly how he'd done it 10,000 times. Left hand supporting the forend, right hand on the grip, cheek well tight against the stock. Breathing controlled. 2 breaths in, 2 breaths out. Slow the heart. Find the space between beats. "Stop," Elena said. David froze. "You're fighting yourself, Colonel. I can see it from here. Your shoulders are tense. Your jaw's clenched. You're trying to force your body to be still." She shifted closer. "Traditional doctrine says the body is chaos and the mind brings order. Resonance protocol says that's backwards. Your body already knows the rhythm. You just have to stop shouting over it. My body's 58 years old and half of it doesn't work right anymore. I know about the arthritis." David's hands tightened on the rifle. He hadn't told anyone here about that. "Medical records," Elena said quietly. "I read the file General Keller sent. You've been hiding it for 3 years, taking cortisone shots so you can keep shooting, lying on your physical evals. I can still do my job. I'm not questioning that. I'm telling you there's another way." She touched his shoulder just for a second. "Relax. Don't try to control your heartbeat. Listen to it. Feel the rhythm. Now feel the wind, not as an enemy, as a partner." David wanted to tell her this was nonsense. Pseudoscience wrapped in poetry. But Griff had hit a target at 2,800 meters with one eye. Sharon Weiss had done the impossible at 60 years old. And David had promised Marcus he'd protect his daughter, which meant at minimum he owed her the chance to prove she wasn't crazy. He let his shoulders drop, stopped trying to slow his heart, and just felt it beating, steady, reliable, a rhythm he'd carried for 58 years. The wind touched his face, cold, persistent, but not random. It had a pattern, a pulse. Find where they sink, Elena whispered. Your heartbeat and the wind. There's a moment. It comes and goes. But when it's there, you'll know. David watched the target through the scope, felt his heart, felt the wind, and for just a second, impossibly, they matched. He fired. The recoil was familiar. The weight was eternal. And then the sound came back across the valley. Impact. Check it, Elena called to someone David hadn't noticed. Carver standing 50 meters back with binoculars. Center mass, Carver said. Nice shooting, Colonel. David stared downrange. His hands were shaking worse than usual, but the shot had been clean. He hadn't calculated windage, hadn't done the math. He just felt something and trusted it. What the hell was that? Elena smiled. Small, sad. That was what my father died trying to teach. The body isn't a machine, Colonel. It's an instrument. And if you learn to play it, the music is incredible. They shot for 2 hours. David's grouping got tighter. His confidence grew. At one point, he hit a target at 2,400 meters while standing, something he hadn't been able to do in a decade. When the sun was fully up and the frost had burned off, they sat on the shooting platform and drank coffee from a thermos Elena had brought. My father wrote about you, she said, more than anyone else from those years. David wrapped his hands around the cup. The warmth helped the arthritis. He was a better man than I'll ever be. He wrote that you were the only one who understood what the war cost, that everyone else treated it like a sport, counting kills, collecting stories, but you carried every single one like a stone. 12 of my students died in combat. I remember all their names. He wrote that too. He said you were the kind of soldier the military needed and the kind it would never promote, because you cared more about the men than the mission. David looked at her. Your father got promoted just fine, made general before they killed him. The words came out harder than he'd meant them. Elena's face didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. You don't believe the official story either. IED demonstration gone wrong. Explosion. Body too damaged to recover intact. David shook his head. Marcus Torres knew explosives better than anyone I ever met. He wouldn't make that kind of mistake. Then what do you think happened? I think he threatened people who had too much to lose. I think they made him disappear and called it an accident. And I think you've spent 12 years trying to prove his work mattered so his death wouldn't be meaningless. Elena stared into her coffee. When I was 8 years old, my father took me to the range for the first time. Gave me a rifle almost as big as I was. I asked him why I had to learn to shoot. He said because the world was full of people who thought they could take things from you just because they were stronger. And the only way to protect what mattered was to be ready. Sounds like Marcus. He taught me everything. Ballistics, wind reading, trigger control, but also philosophy. He said shooting was meditation, that the moment before you pulled the trigger was the most honest moment a human being could experience, because you couldn't lie to physics. He told me the same thing, Cambodia, 1973. He said you saved his life, talked him out of a mission that would have gotten his entire team killed. David remembered Marcus, 35 years old, and burning with the kind of faith that got soldiers killed, wanting to hit a target that was impossible. Remembered telling him that glory wasn't worth dying for when you had a daughter waiting at home. He listened, David said. Most officers wouldn't have, but Marcus was always willing to hear the truth, even when it hurt. Then I need you to hear this truth, Colonel. Elena turned to face him fully. I'm not running a rogue operation. I'm not selling secrets. I'm trying to save soldiers the system has written off, and someone is trying very hard to stop me. The encrypted communications to Macau. I know about those. Agent Voss showed me the intercepts. Elena's jaw tightened. They're real. Someone in this facility is sending data, but it's not me. Then who? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Before David could respond, Carver approached at a jog. His face was tight. Captain, we've got a situation. They followed him to the communications building. Inside, Voss was standing over a laptop, her face pale. I traced the source, she said without preamble. The encrypted transmissions. They're originating from inside this facility, buried in routine network traffic. Whoever's doing it is good, but not good enough. Can you narrow it to a specific terminal? Elena asked. Working on it. But there's something else. Voss pulled up a file. I ran background checks on all personnel. Deep checks, not the surface-level clearance reviews. And I found something. She turned the laptop so they could see. A photograph. A man, late 50s, professional headshot. The kind of image that belonged on a corporate website or a military personnel file. Master Sergeant Roy Carver, Voss read. Honorable discharge 2015. PTSD following the death of his two sons, Iraq, 2007. But here's what's interesting. 6 months before he joined this facility, he received a cash payment of $50,000. Source unknown. Deposited into an offshore account and then transferred to a bank in Cheyenne. David looked at Carver, who stood in the doorway. The older man's face was stone. Roy, Elena said quietly, tell me she's wrong. She's not wrong about the money, Carver said. His voice was steady, calm, the kind of calm that came before violence or confession. But she's wrong about what it means. Then explain it, David said. Carver stepped into the room, closed the door behind him. When he spoke, every word was measured. 2015, 6 months after I buried my boys, I was sitting in my house in Mississippi with a bottle of bourbon and my service pistol, trying to decide which would be faster. He met Elena's eyes. A man came to my door, said he represented people who were concerned about a military program being developed, a program that could change modern warfare. He offered me $50,000 to infiltrate that program and report back on its effectiveness. You took it, Voss said. I took it, because at that moment I didn't give a damn about anything except ending the pain. Who was the man? David asked. He never gave a name, but he had credentials. Defense Intelligence Agency, real ones. I checked. Voss went pale. DIA is running an operation against this facility? Was running, Carver corrected. Because 3 weeks after I got here, after I saw what Captain Torres was actually doing, I sent the money back. Told them I was out. And they let you walk away? Voss's voice dripped skepticism. No, they threatened to expose me. Said they'd tell Captain Torres I was a plant. Ruin whatever second chance I'd found here. Carver looked at Elena. That's when I came to you. Told you everything. And you said if I was honest from that point forward, the past didn't matter. Elena nodded. It's true, he confessed 2 years ago. I documented it. It's in my personal files. Which you could have fabricated, Voss countered. Or which is the truth, David said. He studied Carver. Read the man's face the way he'd learned to read men in combat when lies got you killed. You're not the leak. No, sir, I'm not. Then who is? Voss pulled up another screen. The transmissions are still active. Happening right now, actually. Give me 5 minutes and I can triangulate the exact terminal. David's phone buzzed. Message from an unknown number. He opened it. A photograph. Taken through a window. Elena and David on the shooting platform that morning, drinking coffee. Below it, a single line of text. Your son is watching. Ask yourself what he sees. David's blood went cold. What is it? Elena asked. He showed her the phone. She read it, frowned. Your son? I don't have contact with my son. Haven't spoken to him in 3 years. But even as he said it, David knew it was a lie. Not because he was lying to them, but because he'd been lying to himself. Michael, 31 years old, journalist. Estranged since the day David had missed his wife's funeral because of a mission in Afghanistan that probably hadn't mattered as much as saying goodbye. I need to make a call, David said. He stepped outside, dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. Young, cautious. Dad? The word hit like shrapnel. Michael, where are you? Silence, then carefully. Why are you asking? Because I'm at a military facility in Wyoming, and someone just sent me a photo that suggests you're here. More silence, longer this time. Michael, answer me. I'm doing my job, Dad, same as you. What job? You're a journalist, not intelligence. Investigative journalist. There's a difference. Michael's voice carried an edge David recognized, the same edge he'd carried at 31 before the world had ground it down. I've been researching black budget programs for 6 months, following the money, and it all leads to a facility called Silverstone, a program called Resonance, and a captain named Torres who's either a genius or running the most elaborate con in military history. David closed his eyes. You're the leak. I'm not leaking anything. I'm investigating. There's a difference. You're compromising a classified operation. I'm exposing potential fraud. $18 billion in defense contracts are at stake, Dad. Companies are lobbying to shut down Resonance before it makes their training programs obsolete. You think that's not worth investigating? I think you're my son, and you're putting yourself in danger. Michael laughed, bitter. Now you care about danger? Where was that care when Mom was dying and you were in Kandahar? Where was it when I called you 12 times and you couldn't be bothered to answer because the mission was too important? David had no answer for that because Michael was right. Are you working for the DIA? I'm working for Sarah Chen, investigative reporter, Los Angeles Times. We've been building a case about defense contractor corruption. Your General Keller is neck deep in it. Stock options, kickbacks, the whole package. Keller sent me here. I know. That's why I came. Because if he sent you, Dad, it means you're the weapon. You're the trusted source who's supposed to validate the lie that Torres is compromised. And then they shut her down and $18 billion in contracts. Stay safe. David leaned against the building. The morning sun was warm, but he felt cold. You should have told me. Would you have believed me? Or would you have done what you always do? Follow orders. Trust the chain of command. Assume the mission is righteous because someone with stars on their shoulders said so. The words cut because they were true. Michael, listen to me very carefully. If you're here, if you're inside this facility, you need to leave now. Why? Because Elena Torres is trying to do something good and you're putting her at risk. These people, the soldiers here, they've been thrown away by the system. She's giving them a second chance. And if you expose this before she can prove it works, you'll destroy the only hope they have. Silence on the other end, then quietly. You believe in her. You actually believe in what she's doing. I believe in what her father tried to build, and I believe she's doing it the right way. Then help me prove it. Give me access. Let me document what's really happening here. Not the classified version. The truth. If Torres is clean, my article will show that. It'll expose Keller and the contractors trying to bury her. But I need evidence. David thought about Marcus, thought about promises and duty, and the difference between orders and honor. Where are you? Communications building, server room. I've been hiding in the maintenance crawl space. David turned, looked at the building he'd just left. How long have you been there? 3 days. Came in with a supply delivery. Been living on protein bars and tap water. Come out. Now we'll talk about this face to face. Dad, if I come out, they'll arrest me. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that. I'm promising it anyway. Because you're my son and I've failed you enough. I'm not failing you today. Another silence. David counted his heartbeats, 17 before Michael spoke again. Okay, I'm coming out. But Dad, you need to know something. The transmissions to Macau? That's not me. I've been monitoring network traffic for my investigation, but I haven't sent anything outside this facility. Someone else is running a separate operation. Then who? I don't know, but whoever it is, they're good. Professional level encryption, not journalist level, intelligence level. David heard a sound behind him. Turned to see Elena and Voss emerging from the communications building. Find him? He asked. Server room, Voss said, tracking the access logs now. Elena looked at David, read something in his face. What's wrong? My son is in that server room. Her eyes widened. Your son is the leak? He's a journalist, investigating defense contractor corruption. He's been here 3 days. 3 days? Voss pulled her weapon. And you're just telling us now? I just found out now. Voss moved toward the building. David caught her arm. He's not a threat. He's a kid with a laptop trying to expose fraud. He's a security breach. Voss pulled free, and I'm taking him into custody. David looked at Elena. Don't let her do this. Elena's face was conflict made flesh. Protocol said secure the breach. Humanity said something different. Agent Voss, she said carefully, stand down until we assess the situation. Captain, with respect, we have an intruder who's been accessing classified systems for 72 hours. Procedure is clear. Procedure is my call, and I'm making it. Stand down. Voss holstered her weapon, but her face said this wasn't over. They entered the server room together. The lights were industrial fluorescent, casting everything in shades of white and gray. Banks of equipment hummed, cool air cycled through vents. And in the corner, emerging from a maintenance hatch, was a young man who looked exactly like David had at 31. Same build, same eyes, same way of carrying himself like he was ready to fight the whole world if it came to that. Michael Harrigan stood, dusted off his jeans, and looked at his father. Hi, Dad. David didn't know what to say. 3 years of silence. 3 years of guilt. All of it compressed into 2 words that felt like they carried the weight of every failure between them. 3 years since Margaret's funeral. 3 years since David had stood in Afghanistan and made the choice to stay on mission instead of coming home to say goodbye to the woman who'd waited 30 years for him to choose her first. She'd died alone. Well, not alone. Michael had been there, holding her hand, listening to her call for David in the morphine haze, promising her that Dad would be there soon, lying because the truth would have broken what was left of her heart. David had made it back 4 days after they'd lowered her into the ground. Michael had been standing in the driveway when David pulled up, 31 years old, eyes red from crying, face hard from anger. "She asked for you," Michael had said. "Every day for 2 weeks, called your name. I came as fast as I could. The mission. Michael's laugh had been sharp, bitter. "It's always the mission, isn't it? Even when Mom was dying, the mission mattered more." "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? I sat with her, Dad. I watched her fade. I lied to her every single day and told her you were coming, that you loved her, that the mission was almost over. And she believed me because she'd been believing that same lie for 30 years. David had tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to say anything that would bridge the canyon opening between them. Michael had just shaken his head. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want your explanations or your justifications or your stories about how the mission was too important. Mom was important, she was the mission, and you chose wrong." That had been 3 years ago. 3 years of silence. 3 years of David trying to convince himself that he'd made the right choice, that the mission had mattered, that sacrificing his wife's final moments had been worth whatever objectives he'd achieved in Afghanistan. Objectives he couldn't even remember now. "Hi, son." Elena stepped forward. "Michael Harrigan, you're trespassing on a classified military facility. You've accessed secured computer systems without authorization, and you've compromised an active operation. Under military law, I can have you detained indefinitely." Michael didn't flinch. "Under the First Amendment, I can investigate government fraud. And based on what I've seen here, Captain Torres, you're not the one committing fraud. General Keller is." "What did you see?" Voss asked. Michael pulled a small drive from his pocket. "Financial records, communications. Keller has stock options in 3 different defense contractors worth about $4 million. Companies that are losing contracts because Resonance Protocol makes their training programs obsolete. He's been lobbying to shut you down for 8 months. The classified intel about Chinese espionage? He fabricated it, planted evidence to justify terminating your program." Elena took the drive. "This is real? Verify it yourself. I've got bank statements, stock certificates, email chains. Keller sent Colonel Harrigan here because he knew a trusted source saying you're compromised would be enough to kill the program. No trial, no investigation, just reassignment and shutdown." David felt the weight of it settling. He'd been used, again, the same way he'd been used in a dozen countries where the mission wasn't what they'd said it was. "Why should we trust you?" Voss asked. Michael looked at her. "Because I've got nothing to gain by lying. I'm a journalist. My job is the truth. If Torres is dirty, I'll expose that. If Keller's dirty, I'll expose that. But I won't sit by while good soldiers get thrown away because some general wants to protect his stock portfolio." Elena looked at David. "He's your son." "He is. Do you trust him?" David thought about all the years of distance, all the failures, all the moments he'd chosen the mission over the family. And he thought about the fact that Michael was here, risking federal prison to expose corruption. The same thing David should have been doing his whole career instead of blindly following orders. "I trust him." Elena nodded slowly. Then she looked at Voss. "Can you verify the data on that drive?" "I can try, but if it's authentic, we're talking about a conspiracy that goes up to general officer level. That's not something we handle quietly." "No," Elena said, "it's not." She turned to Michael. "You said you wanted to document the truth. Show what resonance really is." "Yes, ma'am." "Then stay, officially, as an embedded journalist. Document the training. Interview the operators. See for yourself what we're building. And when you write your article, tell the truth. All of it. The successes and the failures." Michael blinked. "You're giving me access?" "I'm giving you transparency, because the only way to fight lies is with truth." She held out her hand. "Deal?" Michael shook it. "Deal." Voss looked like she'd swallowed glass. "Captain, this is highly irregular. So is sending a colonel to sabotage a program based on fabricated evidence. We're past regular, Agent Voss." David watched his son, watched Elena, watched 2 people from different generations trying to do the right thing in a system designed to punish exactly that. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt something like hope. "Michael," he said quietly. His son turned. "I'm sorry for missing the funeral, for not being there, for choosing the mission over family every single time." Michael's face was carefully neutral, the armor of someone who'd been hurt too many times. "Okay, not forgiveness. Not yet, but not rejection either." It was a start. Elena cleared her throat. "We got bigger problems. If the Macau transmissions aren't from Michael, then someone else is running an operation, someone with professional-grade tradecraft." "I can help with that," Michael said. "I've been monitoring the network. The transmissions happen at irregular intervals. No pattern I can find, but they're definitely going out." Voss pulled up her laptop. "Show me." They spent the next 2 hours in the server room tracing data packets and encryption signatures. Michael worked alongside Voss with an ease that suggested he'd done this before. David stood back, watching his son become someone he'd never really known. A man, competent, driven, everything David had wanted him to be, achieved without David's help. The weight of that realization was heavier than any rifle. "Got something," Voss said finally. "The transmissions are routing through a terminal in the administrative building. Personnel office." Elena frowned. "That's Dr. Park's office. He manages all the psychological evaluations." They moved as a unit, fast but not panicked, professional. The administrative building was quiet. Most personnel were at training. They found Park's office empty. Door unlocked, computer still running. Voss checked the logs. Last transmission was 40 minutes ago. Sent a complete roster of all operators, including psychological profiles and training progress metrics. "To who?" Elena asked. "IP address traces to a server in Macau, but it's a relay. The final destination is masked." David looked around the office, clean, organized, photos on the desk, Park with his family, Park receiving an award, Park standing next to someone in uniform David almost recognized. He picked up the photo, looked closer. "Elena, who is this?" She glanced at the photo. "That's Dr. Park and his mentor from medical school. Dr. Chen, I think. He passed away a few years ago." David stared at the image, at the older man in the photograph. Late 70s, distinguished, wearing a suit that screamed money and power, and a West Point ring on his right hand. "This isn't his mentor," David said slowly. "This is General Robert Chen, retired, former MACVSOG commander." The name hung in the air like smoke. "Chen," Elena whispered. "My father served under him, in Cambodia." "So did I." David set down the photo. "Chen was the one who signed off on most of our operations. Black ops, deniable. The kind where if you got caught, the government swore they'd never heard of you." "Why would Park have a photo with him?" "Better question," Voss said. "Why would Park be sending data to Chinese servers if he's connected to a former American general?" David looked at the computer screen, at the transmission logs, at the pattern emerging. Because Chen isn't working for America anymore. The door behind them opened. Dr. Park stood there. He held a pistol, small caliber, civilian model. But at 10 feet, caliber didn't matter. "I was hoping you wouldn't figure it out this quickly," he said. His voice was calm, almost apologetic. "I needed another week." Elena raised her hand slowly. "James, talk to us. Whatever this is, we can work it out." "No, Captain, we can't." Park's gun hand was steady. "Because in 1 week, General Chen is going public with evidence that your father was murdered. That he was killed because he discovered proof of American POWs left behind in Laos. And that evidence is going to destroy the Pentagon's credibility so completely that every program like yours, every black budget operation, every classified mission will come under congressional investigation." David felt pieces clicking into place. Chen wants revenge. Chen wants justice for the men who were abandoned, for the lies that got them left behind, for a system that protects itself instead of the soldiers who serve it. "By burning down the military from the inside," Voss said, "by forcing accountability." Park's eyes were sad but certain. "I'm sorry, Captain Torres. Your program is just collateral damage, but the truth is bigger than any of us." Elena took a step forward. "My father's murder. You know who killed him. General Chen does. And he'll testify. But not until the evidence is public. Not until it's too late to silence him the way they silenced Marcus." "Who killed him, James?" Park looked at her for a long moment. Then he said a name, and the world tilted sideways. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The mountains stood silent, and in a server room in Wyoming, 4 people stared at a truth that changed everything. David's phone buzzed. Message from General Keller. "Status report, Colonel. Do we have grounds for termination?" David looked at Elena, at his son, at the gun in Park's hands and the weight of choices that never got easier. He typed 3 words: "Situation is complicated." Then he put away the phone and did what Marcus Torres had taught him 35 years ago in a jungle that officially didn't exist. He chose the truth over the mission, whatever that cost. The name hung in the air like cordite after a rifle shot. Sergeant Major Frank Devlin. David Harrigan felt the floor shift beneath him. Not literally, but the world had a way of tilting when the past stopped being past and became present tense with a loaded weapon. Frank Devlin. The name dragged memories up from places David had buried them. Devlin had been General Keller's right hand for 20 years, stone-faced, efficient, the kind of soldier who followed orders so completely you wondered if he had a soul or just a manual where his conscience should be. And according to Dr. James Park, who still held a pistol with hands steadier than they had any right to be, Devlin had put a bullet in Marcus Torres and called it an accident. Elena Torres had gone very still, the kind of still that came before violence or tears, and David couldn't tell which would come first. "You're certain," she said, her voice was ice. Park nodded. "General Chen has documentation. Witness testimony from the ordnance team that was supposed to be at the demonstration. They were told to stand down 30 minutes before the explosion. Devlin went in alone with Marcus. Only Devlin walked out." "Why?" The word came from Elena like a bullet. "Why would Devlin kill my father?" "Because Marcus was going to go public with evidence about POWs left in Laos. American soldiers abandoned when we pulled out in '75. The CIA knew. The Pentagon knew. They buried it because acknowledging it would mean admitting to 40 years of lies." Park's eyes were sad, tired. "Your father wouldn't let it go. He said every soldier left behind was a promise broken. So they broke him instead." David thought about Marcus, thought about the man who'd carried him through a jungle when leaving him would have been easier. Marcus Torres had never been good at letting things go when they mattered. It had made him a great soldier. It had gotten him killed. "Where's Devlin now?" Voss asked. Her hand was on her sidearm, but she hadn't drawn. Smart. Park might be holding a gun, but he wasn't holding it like he wanted to use it. "Florida. Retired. Living off a pension and whatever Keller pays him to keep quiet." Park's gun lowered slightly. "General Chen is dying. Stage 4 cancer. 6 months at most. He wants to testify before Congress. Put everything on record. Expose Devlin, Keller, and everyone else who decided American soldiers were acceptable losses for political convenience." "And you've been feeding him intelligence," Elena said. "I've been feeding him truth. Your program, Captain Torres, it's good work, important work, but it's also funded by the same Pentagon that buried your father's murder. The same system that left men to die in prison camps because acknowledging them was inconvenient." Park met her eyes. "I'm sorry you're caught in this, but some things are bigger than any of us." David stepped forward slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "James, put down the gun. Whatever you think you're doing, this isn't the way." "There is no other way." Chen tried official channels for 30 years. Letters, reports, formal complaints. They buried every single one. The only language the Pentagon understands is public scandal. So that's what we're giving them. By destroying Elena's program. By using it as proof, Resonance Protocol works because it's built on Marcus Torres's research. Research the Pentagon tried to bury along with him. When Chen testifies, when the media sees that Marcus was murdered for trying to save soldiers, and that his daughter continued his work despite institutional opposition, the narrative becomes undeniable. Michael spoke up from where he'd been standing silent. "You're making her a martyr." "I'm making her a hero. There's a difference." "Not to her career there isn't," David said. Park's face flickered. "Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion." "I know, and I'm sorry. But 40 men died in Laotian prisons waiting for a country that forgot them. Their families deserve the truth, even if it costs us everything." The gun came back up, and then Roy Carver spoke from the doorway David hadn't realized he'd moved to. "Son, you got about 3 seconds to put that weapon down before I drop you." Park turned, found himself staring at Carver's M9, held with the casual competence of someone who'd pointed guns at people in significantly worse situations. "Master Sergeant, this doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't. You're threatening my commanding officer." "That makes it my business." Carver's voice was flat, empty of everything except certainty. "And I don't care how noble you think your cause is. You point a gun at Captain Torres, you point it at me." For 5 seconds, nobody moved. Then Park set his pistol on the desk, stepped back, raised his hands. I wasn't going to shoot anyone. I just needed you to listen. We're listening, Elena said. But you crossed a line, James. I know. Voss moved forward, retrieved Park's weapon, checked the chamber. It's not even loaded. Park smiled, bitter. I'm a psychiatrist, not a soldier. I wouldn't know what to do with a loaded gun if I tried. David felt something like relief, something like disgust. And underneath it all, something like understanding. Because Park was right about one thing. Some truths were worth dying for. The question was whether they were worth killing for. They secured Park in one of the administrative offices under Carver's supervision. Not quite arrest, not quite house detention. Something in between that nobody had a name for because the situation had stopped following any script 10 minutes ago. David, Elena, Michael, and Voss reconvened in the command center. Through the windows, the mountains looked the same as they had that morning. Indifferent, patient. They'd been there for millions of years. They'd be there long after everyone in this room was dust. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Elena stood at the head of the table. She'd aged 10 years in the last hour. Or maybe David was just seeing clearly for the first time. Options, she said. Voss spoke first. We report everything to JSOC Park's espionage, Chen's conspiracy, Keller's corruption. Let the investigation sort it out. That investigation will take months, Michael countered. By the time it concludes, this program will be shut down, every operator will be scattered, and the story will be buried so deep nobody will ever find it. As opposed to what? Letting Park and Chen burn down the Pentagon's credibility? Maybe the Pentagon's credibility needs burning. Michael's voice carried an edge. If they murdered Marcus Torres and covered it up for 12 years, if they left POWs to die, if they're sabotaging programs that could save lives just to protect defense contracts, then maybe the system needs to be exposed. That's not your call to make, Voss said. It's not yours either. David watched them argue. Young voices, certain voices. The kind of certainty that came before you'd seen enough good people do terrible things for complicated reasons. Elena, he said quietly, what do you want? She looked at him, really looked. And he saw Marcus in her eyes, the same weight, the same understanding that some choices didn't have good options, only less terrible ones. I want my father's murder solved. I want the men responsible held accountable. I want the POWs acknowledged and their families given closure. She paused. But I also want my operators protected. They've been thrown away once already. I won't let it happen again. You can't have both, Voss said. If Chen goes public, the scandal will consume everything, including this program. Then we go public first. Everyone turned to Michael. You want to control the narrative, he said, thinking out loud. Don't wait for Chen. Don't wait for the Pentagon investigation. Give me everything. All of it. The murder, the POWs, Keller's corruption, resonance protocols, successes and failures. I write it, we publish it, and we do it in a way that makes shutting you down politically impossible. That's insane, Voss said. That's journalism. Michael looked at Elena. You said you wanted transparency. This is what transparency looks like. Give the public the truth before the Pentagon can spin it. Show them what resonance does. Show them what happened to your father. Let them decide who the heroes and villains are. Elena shook her head. That puts a target on everyone here. Keller, Devlin, everyone involved in the cover-up, they'll come after us. They're already coming after you. At least this way you control the story. David listened, watched, and thought about Marcus Torres standing in a jungle in Cambodia, deciding whether to trust an 18-year-old kid's instinct over his own experience. Marcus had trusted him. David had been right. Maybe it was time to return the favor. Do it, he said. Everyone looked at him. Colonel? Elena's voice was careful. Give Michael everything. Let him write it, but we need insurance. What kind of insurance? David pulled out his phone, pulled up General Keller's last message, the one asking for a status report. I'm going to tell Keller the program is clean, that there's no evidence of espionage, that Captain Torres is running a legitimate operation and should be commended, not investigated. He won't believe you, Voss said. He will, because I'm going to tell him exactly what he wants to hear. That resonance protocol is effective, that it should be expanded, that the Pentagon should invest more resources, not less. Why would that convince him? Because Keller doesn't want the program shut down. He wants to control it. If he can discredit Elena and take over resonance, he can steer contracts to his preferred companies. Bigger budget means bigger kickbacks. Elena frowned. You're giving him a reason to keep us alive. I'm giving him a reason to move slowly. And while he's planning his takeover, Michael publishes the truth. By the time Keller realizes what's happening, it's too late to stop it. Voss shook her head. That's conspiracy. That's insubordination. That's probably treason. That's what you do when the mission and the orders stop being the same thing. David met her eyes. I've spent 34 years following orders, trusting the chain of command, believing the mission was righteous because someone with rank told me it was. And you know what I learned? Sometimes the orders are wrong, sometimes the system is broken, and sometimes the only honorable choice is to do the dishonorable thing. Silence settled over the room. Then Voss did something David didn't expect. She closed her laptop, unplugged the encrypted drive, set both on the table. For the record, I'm advising against this course of action. Noted, Elena said, but I'm not stopping you either. Voss looked at each of them. I joined DIA because I wanted to protect this country, but I'm realizing that sometimes protecting the country means protecting it from the people running it. David nodded. Welcome to the gray area, Agent Voss. It's where the real war happens. Michael started gathering equipment, camera, recording device, notebook. I'll need interviews, documentation, everything you can give me on resonance protocol, your father's research, the operator's stories, Keller's financial ties, Devlin's involvement. You'll have it, Elena said. But Michael, when you write this, write it true, not heroic, not dramatic, just true. That's the only way I know how. David's phone buzzed. Another message from Keller. Colonel Harrigan, I need your assessment immediately. Pentagon is pressuring me for results. David typed carefully. Program is legitimate, no evidence of espionage. Captain Torres running effective operation. Recommend expansion, not termination. Full report forthcoming. He hit send, watched the message disappear into whatever void messages went to, and wondered if he'd just saved Elena's program or signed all their death warrants. The next 72 hours blurred together in a way that reminded David of combat. Time lost meaning. Sleep became theoretical. Everything narrowed to the mission. Michael interviewed every operator. Griff talked about losing his eye and finding purpose. Sharon Weiss described watching her spotter die and learning to live again. Carver told the story of his sons and the second chance Elena had given him. Danny Ortiz, still recovering in the medical wing, spoke about the moment his mind fractured and how Dr. Park had put him back together. Every story was different. Every story was the same. Thrown away, written off, resurrected. Michael documented it all with the intensity of someone who'd found a story that mattered. David watched his son work and saw glimpses of the man he'd hoped Michael would become. Principled, thorough, unwilling to settle for easy answers. He wondered if Michael had learned that despite his father or because of him. Probably both. On the second day, Elena took Michael to the secure archive where she kept her father's research. 40 years of notes, handwritten calculations, photographs from ranges in a dozen countries. The evolution of an idea from theory to practice. This is what they killed him for, she said, running her fingers over a notebook dated 1973. Not because it was wrong, because it was right and they weren't ready. Michael photographed every page. Did you ever doubt him? After he died, when everyone said he was reckless, did you believe them? For years. I was 20 when he died, still believed the military was honorable, that if they said something was true, it was true. She looked at David, who was standing in the doorway. Then I read his research, really read it, and I understood he wasn't reckless. He was right, and that was more dangerous than being wrong ever could be. On the third day, Voss presented evidence she'd compiled on General Keller. Bank statements, stock certificates, emails between Keller and defense contractors discussing ways to undermine resonance protocol. It was damning, comprehensive, the kind of evidence that ended careers and started congressional investigations. How long have you had this? Elena asked. 6 months. I was ordered to sit on it until we had grounds to arrest you. Then we'd release it all at once. Bury you both in the same scandal. Voss's face was carefully neutral. I'm choosing to believe that protecting you serves the mission better than following those orders. You'll lose your career. Probably, but I'll keep my integrity. Turns out that's worth more than I thought. David understood. Voss was young enough to still believe integrity mattered. Old enough to know what it cost. That was the sweet spot. The moment when you could still choose to be better than the system wanted you to be. On the evening of the third day, General Robert Chen called. The phone rang in Park's confiscated cell. Carver, who'd been monitoring it, brought it to the command center on speaker. An old man's voice, rough with age and sickness, but still carrying authority. Dr. Park, status report. Elena looked at David. He nodded. She answered, General Chen, this is Captain Elena Torres. Dr. Park is currently detained. You're speaking to me. Silence. Long enough that David thought the connection had dropped. Then quietly, Marcus's daughter. Yes, sir. You sound like him. Same tone, same certainty. I'm told I have his stubbornness too. A sound that might have been a laugh. Your father was the finest soldier I ever commanded, and I got him killed. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. You gave the order to stage his death. I gave the order to make him disappear, to scare him into silence about the POWs. Devlin was supposed to make it look like Marcus had gone rogue, faked his death, disappeared into civilian life. Chen's voice broke. Devlin exceeded his authority, put a bullet in Marcus instead. By the time I found out, it was too late to fix it, so I buried it deeper. Protected Devlin, protected the lie, and I've lived with that choice every day since. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm dying, because I want to testify before Congress. Put everything on record before I'm gone. The POWs, Marcus's murder, all of it. And I need you to understand that exposing this will destroy your program. The scandal will consume everything. I know. And you're willing to accept that? Elena looked around the room, at David, at Michael, at Voss, at Carver standing in the doorway. I'm willing to fight for the truth, whatever that costs. Chen was quiet for a moment. Your father said the same thing. It's why I loved him. It's why I killed him. You didn't pull the trigger. I gave the order. Same thing. A cough, wet and harsh. Captain Torres, I can delay my testimony. Give you time to prepare, time to protect your operators. But eventually the truth comes out. It has to. I understand, but General, before you testify, there's something you should know. We're going public first, with everything. A journalist is writing the story now. It'll publish before you ever reach Congress. Silence again. Then whose journalist? Mine, David said, speaking for the first time. My son. He's thorough. He's honest. And he's going to tell the truth in a way that makes it impossible to bury. Colonel Harrigan, Marcus wrote about you, said you were the only one he trusted completely. He trusted too easily, sir. No, he trusted correctly. Just not enough people listened. Chen coughed again. If you're going public, do it soon. I'm on borrowed time. Once I'm gone, the evidence dies with me unless it's already out there. How long do we have? 6 months? Maybe 8. But I won't be coherent enough to testify after 4 months. The cancer moves fast at the end. Elena made a decision. We'll publish in 2 weeks. That gives you 4 months to prepare for Congress. You testify, you confirm everything in the article, and you put names on record. Keller, Devlin, everyone involved. Agreed, Captain Torres. Yes, sir. Make your father proud. The line went dead. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Michael said, 2 weeks. I can make that work. Elena nodded. Then we have a plan. We have a timetable, Voss corrected. Not the same as a plan. Plans are overrated, Carver said from the doorway. Timetable's all we need. David looked at his watch. 14 days, 336 hours, 20,160 minutes. He'd survived longer deployments, but never with this much on the line. That night, David found Michael on the observation deck outside the command center. His son sat on a bench, laptop open, typing with the focused intensity of someone racing a deadline. You should sleep, David said. Can't. Too much work. David sat beside him. They'd been in the same room for 3 days, but hadn't really talked. Not about anything that mattered. Your mother would be proud of you, David said. What you're doing, standing up for something. Michael stopped typing. She'd be proud of you too. Finally. I'm not doing anything I should have done decades ago. Better late than never, right? Isn't that what you always said? Michael's voice carried an edge. Not quite anger, not quite forgiveness, something in between. I'm sorry I wasn't there when she died. You said that already? I know, but I need you to understand it wasn't that the mission was more important. It was that I didn't know how to be present for something I couldn't fix. Combat, I understood. Death on a battlefield, I could process. But watching someone I loved die slowly, unable to do anything, that terrified me more than any enemy ever did. Michael was quiet. The mountains stood silent around them. Stars filled the sky in numbers city kids never saw. She asked for you, Michael said finally, every day for 2 weeks. Called your name when the morphine got heavy, and I had to tell her you weren't coming, that the mission was too important, that you'd be there soon. David felt something break inside. I'm sorry. I know, But sorry doesn't give me those 2 weeks back. Sorry doesn't let me tell her you chose us just once over the uniform. You're right, it doesn't. So why are you choosing now? Why is Elena Torres worth risking your career when your own wife wasn't worth leaving a mission? The question hit like a bullet. Clean, center mass. The kind of wound that killed you slow. Because Elena reminds me of your mother. Same strength, same refusal to quit, even when the system's against her. And maybe if I can protect Elena, if I can help her finish what her father started, maybe it counts for something. Maybe it balances the scales, just a little, for all the times I've failed the people who needed me. That's not how it works, Dad. You don't get redemption by proxy. I know, but it's all I have left to try. Michael stared at his laptop screen, at the words accumulating, at the story taking shape. This article, when it publishes, people are going to hate you. Veterans will call you a traitor. The Pentagon will destroy your reputation. You'll lose your pension, probably face court-martial. And for what? To protect a program you didn't even believe in 3 days ago. I believe in it now. Why? David thought about Griff hitting impossible shots with one eye, about Carver finding purpose after burying his sons, about Elena carrying her father's legacy with more care than Marcus ever had. Because I've spent 34 years watching the military throw away good soldiers when they break. And Elena's the first person I've seen who's trying to put them back together. That's worth protecting. Michael nodded slowly. Okay. When this is over, when the article's published and the scandal breaks and everything goes to hell, you're going to need somewhere to go, somewhere the media won't find you. He looked at David. You can stay with me if you want. David felt his throat tighten. You'd let me do that? You're still my father. Even when I hate you, you're still my father. And maybe it's time we figured out what that means when you're not wearing the uniform. For the first time in 3 years, David reached out and put his hand on his son's shoulder. Michael didn't pull away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door opening, and sometimes that was enough. The next morning, David sent his full report to General Keller. 12 pages, detailed analysis of resonance protocol, recommendations for expansion, praise for Captain Torres' leadership and innovation. Every word carefully crafted to tell Keller exactly what he wanted to hear. That the program was valuable enough to control, not destroy. Keller's response came within an hour. Excellent work, Colonel. Return to Fort Bragg for debrief. Captain Torres will receive new funding and oversight. Pentagon is very pleased. David read it twice. Oversight meant control. New funding meant contracts. Pentagon pleased meant Keller had won, or thought he had. In 2 weeks, Michael's article would publish, and Keller's carefully constructed lie would burn. David deleted the message, walked out to the range where Elena was training a new operator through breath synchronization, watched the mountains stand silent and patient, and wondered if Marcus Torres was watching from somewhere, proud or disappointed, or both. Probably both. That seemed to be the way with fathers and legacies. Marcus had spent 40 years building something the system wasn't ready for, had died before he could finish it, had trusted that someone would carry it forward even when every institution stood against them. He trusted David to protect his daughter, and for 12 years, David had done nothing, had believed the lie, had let Elena fight alone because it was easier than questioning orders. But not anymore. Whatever came next, whatever price Keller extracted, whatever court-martial or disgrace or pension loss waited at the end of this road, David would face it knowing he'd finally chosen right, finally honored the promise, finally become the man Marcus had believed he was even when David himself hadn't believed it. You did your best, and hoped it was enough. The mountains stood witness, silent, patient, keeping their own counsel. They'd been there before humans invented honor. They'd be there after humans figured out what it meant. And in the space between, David Harrigan would do what he should have done 34 years ago. He would choose the people over the mission and live with whatever that cost. 13 days. That's how long it took for everything David Harrigan thought he understood about duty and honor to collapse into something he didn't recognize anymore. 13 days of watching Michael interview operators and compile evidence. 13 days of Elena running training exercises while knowing every moment might be the last before the world discovered what they were building. 13 days of pretending to General Keller that everything was proceeding according to plan. 13 days of lying to a superior officer, of conspiracy, of choosing a course of action that would end his career and possibly his freedom. 13 days of feeling more alive than he had in 34 years. The first day, he'd woken at 0500 as always, and spent 20 minutes staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell he was doing. wondering if he was throwing away everything he'd built for a program he'd only known for 72 hours. For a woman he barely knew who happened to be the daughter of a dead friend. For a principle that felt noble in theory but reckless in practice. By day 3, he'd stopped wondering. By day 7, he'd accepted that there was no going back. By day 10, he'd realized he didn't want to go back even if he could. Because something had changed, something fundamental. The uniform he'd worn for 34 years suddenly felt like a costume. The rank insignia on his collar felt like jewelry. The whole apparatus of military hierarchy and order and unquestioning obedience felt like a cage he'd been living in so long he'd forgotten it was locked. Elena had shown him what freedom looked like. Not the freedom to do whatever you wanted. That was chaos. That was adolescence. Real freedom. The freedom to choose what mattered. To stand for something that cost you everything and do it anyway because the cost of staying silent was worse. That kind of freedom terrified him. That kind of freedom made him feel human again. On the morning of day 14, the plan died. David was in the mess hall drinking coffee that tasted like every military installation he had ever served on when Carver found him. The older man's face was tight, controlled, the expression of someone delivering news that couldn't wait and wouldn't improve with time. "Colonel, we've got a situation." David set down his coffee. "What kind?" "The kind where a Pentagon evaluation team just showed up at the front gate. 12 people, led by Colonel Richard Stahl." The name meant nothing to David for about 3 seconds. Then memory clicked. Stahl, Marine Corps, legendary sniper instructor. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. The kind of soldier who'd built his entire identity on being the best and didn't tolerate anyone suggesting there might be a better way. And according to the briefing materials Voss had compiled, Stahl was one of General Keller's closest allies. "When did they arrive?" 20 minutes ago. Captain Torres is stalling them at the admin building. Told them she needs to prepare facilities for inspection. But Colonel, they're not here to inspect. They're here to compete." David stood. "Explain." "Stahl says the Pentagon wants a formal evaluation. Head-to-head comparison. Traditional sniper doctrine versus resonance protocol. Best performance wins official endorsement and expanded funding." "That's a trap." "Yes, sir, but it's also an opportunity." They walked quickly across the compound. The morning air was cold enough to see breath. The mountains looked the same as always, indifferent to human drama. David's mind was racing. Keller had received his report, had agreed to expanded funding, had seemed satisfied. But Keller didn't get to where he was by being satisfied. He got there by being 3 moves ahead. This evaluation wasn't about validating resonance protocol. It was about discrediting it publicly before Michael's article could publish. They found Elena in the command center with Voss and Michael. Through the window, David could see the evaluation team setting up equipment on the main range. Professional, efficient, the kind of precision that came from knowing exactly what you were doing and why. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," David said. Elena's face was carved from stone. "Keller played us. He never intended to let the program continue. He was buying time to set this up." "A public demonstration," Voss said, "with media observers, Pentagon brass, congressional liaisons. If resonance fails under scrutiny, the program gets shut down and Keller looks like the hero who exposed fraud before it could spread. And if we refuse to participate, then we look like we're hiding something. Program gets shut down anyway." Elena's hands were flat on the table, steady, but David saw the tension in her shoulders. "We're trapped." Michael looked up from his laptop. "The article isn't ready. I need 3 more days minimum to verify sources and finalize Chen's testimony integration." "We don't have 3 days," Voss said. "The demonstration is scheduled for tomorrow morning. 0800, live feed to Pentagon Command." David walked to the window, watched Stahl's team moving with military efficiency, counted 12 shooters, all younger than David, all conventionally trained, all certain that what they'd been taught was the only way. He'd been one of them once. Maybe he still was. "What are the parameters?" he asked. Elena pulled up a document on her tablet. 3 stages. First stage is standard qualification. 800 meters, stationary targets. Second stage is moving targets at variable distances up to 2,000 meters. Third stage is what Stahl calls an ethical assessment. Mixed hostile and civilian targets at extreme range. Operators have to discriminate and engage under time pressure. "That's designed to break us," Carver said from the doorway. "Resonance teaches rhythm and synchronization. But discrimination under pressure requires the kind of mathematical calculation we've been training people to move beyond." Can our operators handle it? David asked. Elena didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried weight. I don't know. We've focused on building confidence and capability in people the system wrote off. But we haven't stress tested them against the kind of scenario Stahl's designed. This is psychological warfare disguised as evaluation. Then we need to change the game, Michael said. Everyone looked at him. You said this is being broadcast to Pentagon Command. That means it's being recorded, documented. He stood pacing. Stahl wants to embarrass you. Use that. Let him think he's winning. And while he's focused on the competition, I'll be documenting everything. The operators' stories, their transformations, the human element that makes resonance more than just a training method. That doesn't change the outcome of the demonstration, Voss pointed out. No, but it changes the narrative. If resonance loses on technical performance but wins on human impact, the story becomes about the Pentagon choosing efficiency over people. That's the angle we need. David thought about it. Thought about Marcus Torres, who'd never been good at playing political games, who'd fought straight ahead and gotten himself killed for it. Elena was smarter than her father. The question was whether she was ruthless enough. We participate, David said, but we don't just compete, we expose. Every operator tells their story on camera. Every shot is contextualized. Griff hits a target with one eye, we explain he was medically retired and written off. Carver demonstrates rhythm shooting. We talk about his sons and his PTSD. We make it impossible for them to dismiss us as just another training program. Elena nodded slowly. Turn the evaluation into a human interest story. Exactly. Stahl wants a technical competition. We give him a reckoning. That's risky, Voss said. If the operators fail under pressure, we're not just losing a demonstration. We're admitting the program doesn't work. Then we make sure they don't fail. Elena stood. Carver, get all qualified operators to the briefing room. David, I need you to coordinate with Stahl. Keep him focused on logistics while we prepare. Michael, start documenting now. Every conversation, every preparation. I want a complete record. What about me? Voss asked. Elena met her eyes. I need you to contact General Chen. Tell him what's happening. If this goes wrong tomorrow, he needs to be ready to testify immediately. We can't let Keller bury this if we fail. Voss nodded, pulled out her encrypted phone, stepped away. David looked at Elena, saw Marcus in the set of her jaw. The same determination that had carried him through impossible missions. The same determination that had gotten him killed. You sure about this? He asked quietly. No, but I'm sure about them. She gestured toward the window, toward the operators gathering on the range. They deserve the chance to prove everyone wrong, even if it cost us everything. David understood. Sometimes the mission wasn't about winning. Sometimes it was about making sure the fight mattered. The briefing room was packed. 15 operators, ranging from 38 to 61 years old. Every one of them a discard. Every one of them rebuilt by Elena's program into something the system hadn't thought possible. Griff sat in the front row, his one eye fixed on Elena with absolute focus. Carver stood against the back wall, arms folded, face unreadable. Sharon Weiss had her hands clasped in her lap, knuckles white. They knew what was coming. They knew what it meant. Elena stood at the front of the room. No podium, no notes, just her and the truth. Tomorrow morning at 0800, we're going to be evaluated by the Pentagon's top conventional sniper team. They're going to try to prove that everything we've built here is worthless. That resonance protocol is pseudoscience. That you're all still broken soldiers who should have stayed retired. She paused. Let that land, and they might be right. Griff sat up straighter. Weiss's hands tightened. Not about the science works. You've proven that every day. But they're going to design scenarios specifically to break what we've built. They're going to force you into situations where rhythm and synchronization aren't enough, where you have to make split-second ethical decisions under pressure that would break anyone. So why are we doing this? Carver asked. Because if we don't, they shut us down anyway. And every soldier who could have benefited from this program stays broken. Every operator who could have found purpose stays discarded. Elena's voice hardened. But more than that, we're doing this because tomorrow isn't just about shooting. It's about proving that soldiers are more than weapons. That healing matters as much as efficiency. That second chances aren't charity, they're justice. Griff raised his hand. Ma'am, speaking for myself, I can't outshoot these kids on pure technique. My depth perception is gone. My reaction time is slower. If this is a straight competition, we lose. I know. So what's the play? Elena smiled. Small, fierce. We don't play their game. We change it. Every shot you take tomorrow, you tell your story. You explain where you came from and what this program gave you. You make them see you as human beings, not data points. And if we miss, Weiss asked, if the pressure breaks us, then we miss with dignity. We fail with our eyes open and our stories told. Elena looked around the room. My father spent his whole life trying to make the military better. He died because he threatened people who preferred things broken. I won't let that happen again. Tomorrow we fight, not just with rifles, with truth. The room was silent. Then Carver spoke. Captain, I've been a soldier for 40 years, served in jungles and deserts and mountains, seen the best and worst this uniform represents. And I've learned one thing. The military doesn't fear failure. It fears change. What you're asking us to do tomorrow, that's change. Real change, the kind that makes people uncomfortable. I know. Good, because I'm in all the way. One by one, the others nodded. Agreed. Committed. They were old, broken, discarded. But they were also still soldiers. And soldiers finished the mission. That evening, David found Colonel Stahl on the range. The Marine was tall, lean, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then weathered by too much sun. He was checking equipment with the methodical precision of someone who left nothing to chance. Colonel Stahl. Stahl turned, looked David up and down. Colonel Harrigan, General Keller speaks highly of you. I'm sure he does. He says you're a man who understands the value of traditional doctrine, that you recognize innovation for innovation's sake is just another word for chaos. David kept his face neutral. I recognize that the mission comes first. Always. Good. Then you understand why we're here. Resonance protocol is an interesting experiment, but the military doesn't run on experiments. It runs on proven methods. Tomorrow we prove which method actually works. Under conditions you designed. Stahl smiled. Under conditions that reflect real combat, unlike the controlled environments Captain Torres has created here. Every training environment is controlled. That's what training means. True, but some control is about building capability. Other control is about hiding limitations. Stahl gestured at the range. Tomorrow we remove the controls, see what's actually underneath. David studied him, saw a true believer. The kind of soldier who thought certainty was the same as truth. You ever lose a student, Colonel Stahl? In combat? Several. Did you remember their names? Stahl's face flickered. What kind of question is that? Simple one. You train people to fight and die. When they die, do you remember who they were or just that you followed protocol? I remember every operator I've trained, and I sleep well knowing I gave them the best preparation possible. That's where we differ. I remember them too, but I don't sleep well, because preparation isn't enough when the system is broken. Stahl's eyes narrowed. You sound like someone who's forgotten which side they're on. I'm on the same side I've always been on, the side of soldiers who deserve better than being thrown away when they break. Soldiers who break are liabilities. You know that as well as I do. I know that's what I was taught. I also know it's wrong. Stahl stepped closer, close enough that David could smell gun oil and certainty. Tomorrow's demonstration is going to expose resonance for what it is. Emotional manipulation disguised as training. When it's over, this facility will be shut down, Torres will be reassigned, and the military will go back to methods that actually work. And if you're wrong, I'm not. David held his gaze. Then I guess tomorrow we find out which of us has been lying to ourselves. He walked away before Stahl could respond. Behind him, the mountain stood silent, witnesses to one more soldier choosing sides. That night, David couldn't sleep. Hadn't expected to. He sat in his quarters with the lights off, watching moonlight paint the mountain silver. His phone buzzed. Message from General Keller. Colonel Harrigan, tomorrow's demonstration is critical. I'm trusting you to provide objective assessment. The future of military sniper doctrine depends on honest evaluation. David stared at the message, at the lie wrapped in professional language. Keller didn't want honest evaluation. He wanted validation for a decision he'd already made. David had spent 34 years giving generals what they wanted. Tomorrow, he'd give them truth instead. He typed carefully. Understood, sir. You'll get exactly what you deserve. He hit send, deleted the thread, and waited for dawn. The morning came cold and clear. Perfect shooting weather. The kind of day where excuses disappeared and all that remained was capability. David stood at the edge of the range at 0730. The Pentagon evaluation team was already in position. 12 shooters, all under 40, all carrying themselves with the confidence of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged. Elena's team assembled on the opposite side. 15 operators, average age 53, carrying themselves with the quiet dignity of people who'd earned their place the hard way. Media was set up in the observation area. Not major networks, but military journalists and Pentagon liaisons. Enough witnesses to make this official. And in the back, General Robert Chen sat in a wheelchair, oxygen tube running to his nose, eyes sharp despite the body failing around them. He'd flown in overnight, said he wanted to see this, said he owed Marcus that much. Stahl called the gathering to order. Gentlemen and lady, today's evaluation will determine the future of advanced sniper training. We'll proceed through 3 stages. Performance will be measured objectively. Best aggregate score wins official Pentagon endorsement. He paused, looked at Elena. Captain Torres, your team ready? Ready, sir. Then let's begin. Stage 1, 800 meters. Stationary targets. 5 shots per operator. Highest accuracy wins. The conventional team went first. Professional, efficient. Hit rates range from 80 to 100%. Solid performance. Exactly what you'd expect from elite shooters. Then came resonance operators. Griff stepped to the line. Michael was there with a camera, documenting. Sergeant Griffin, Michael said quietly, tell us about your eye. Griff settled into position. Lost it in Fallujah, 2006. Shrapnel from an IED. Doctor said I'd never shoot again. No depth perception, no career, no purpose. He chambered around. Captain Torres taught me different. Taught me the body knows things the eyes can't see. He fired 5 times. Smooth, rhythmic. 4 hits, 1 miss. 80%. Not better than conventional, but close. Carver went next. Lost both my sons in Iraq, 2007. Same bomb, 10 minutes apart. After that, couldn't hold a rifle without shaking. PTSD, they said. Medically retired. 5 shots, 4 hits. Weiss followed. Watched my spotter die in Afghanistan. Bled out in my arms while we waited for medevac that came too late. Couldn't sleep for 3 years. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him dying. 5 shots, 5 hits, 100%. The crowd murmured. Stage 1 ended with conventional team holding slight advantage. 89% aggregate versus resonance's 86%. Stahl looked satisfied. Stage 2, moving targets. Distances from 1,200 to 2,000 meters. 3 shots per operator. This was where it would break. Moving targets at distance required calculation, precision, the kind of technical mastery that took years to develop. Years that soldiers like Griff and Carver and Weiss had lost to trauma and injury in time. Conventional team went first. Performance dropped. 73% hit rate. Still solid, still professional, still the product of the world's most advanced training infrastructure and unlimited budgets. Elena's team stepped up. Griff took his position. David watched him breathe. Watched him not calculate but feel. Watched him trust what his body knew, even though his eye couldn't see. The first shot missed. Wide right by 6 inches at 1,800 meters. The crowd murmured. Griff adjusted, not with math, with instinct, with 40 years of experience compressed into muscle memory that trauma couldn't erase. Second shot, impact. Third shot, impact. 2 out of 3, 67%. Below conventional standards, but impossible for a one-eyed man who shouldn't have been shooting at all. Elena's team stepped up, and something changed. The operators stopped shooting like they were being evaluated. Started shooting like they were proving something. Griff hit 2 out of 3. David watched him breathe, watched him find the rhythm between heartbeat and wind, watched him trust what his body knew. Carver hit 3 out of 3. Perfect score. At 52 years old with PTSD, he'd carried for 17 years. Weiss hit 2 out of 3. The younger operators, the ones who'd failed psych evals and been discharged, they hit at rates that shouldn't have been possible for people the system had written off. Stage 2 ended with resonance team at 78%. 5 points ahead. Stahl's face went tight. The observers started whispering. General Chen smiled. Stage 3, Stahl announced. His voice carried an edge now. Ethical assessment, mixed targets, hostiles and civilians. Distances up to 2,500 meters. Operator must discriminate and engage only valid targets. Time limit, 90 seconds. Any civilian casualty results in automatic disqualification. This was the trap, the scenario designed to break what resonance had built. Because rhythm and synchronization didn't help you tell a gun from a phone at 2,000 meters. That required calculation, analysis, the kind of cognitive processing that trauma disrupted. Conventional team went first. They trained for this exact scenario, moved through it with mechanical precision. 11 out of 12 passed, one civilian casualty, one disqualification. 92% success rate, nearly perfect. Elena's team stepped up. David watched Griff take position, watched him scan the targets. Hostile, civilian, hostile, civilian. Discrimination at distance was the hardest part of sniping, the part where mistakes killed innocent people. Griff fired once, twice, 3 times. Paused on the 4th shot, held for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Time, the range officer called. Griff had 3 hits, all hostile, 0 civilians, but he'd failed to engage 2 targets within the time limit. Technical failure, moral success. Carver went next. Same pattern. Careful discrimination, slow engagement, 4 hostile hits, 0 civilians, 1 target unengaged. The pattern continued. Resonance operators prioritize accuracy over speed, refused to risk civilian casualties even when it meant failing the time standard. By the end of Stage 3, Resonance team had a 67% success rate, 25 points behind conventional. They'd lost. Stahl stood before the assembled observers. Results are clear. Traditional doctrine outperforms Resonance protocol in realistic combat scenarios. Captain Torres's program, while well-intentioned, fails to prepare operators for the ethical complexity of modern warfare. He looked directly at Elena. I'm recommending immediate program termination. The observers nodded. Pentagon liaisons made notes. Media recorded it all. David waited for Elena to argue, to defend, to fight. Instead, she stood, walked to the front, faced the cameras. Colonel Stahl is correct. By his metrics, we failed. Our operators were slower, less efficient, less capable of meeting arbitrary time standards. She paused. But let me show you what we didn't fail at. She gestured to Michael, who pulled up footage on the main screen. Interviews with operators, their stories, before and after. Griff, drinking himself to death in Texas. Carver, sitting with a pistol and bourbon. Weiss, unable to sleep for 3 years. And then after. Griff hitting targets with one eye. Carver teaching rhythm to new operators. Weiss smiling for the first time since Afghanistan. Traditional doctrine measures success by efficiency, Elena said. Resonance protocol measures it by transformation. Yes, our operators are slower because they're thinking, they're choosing, they're refusing to sacrifice ethics for speed. She looked at Stahl. You trained 12 perfect weapons. I trained 15 broken soldiers to be human beings again. You tell me which the military actually needs. The room went silent. General Chen raised his hand, weak, shaking, but clear. I'd like to say something. All eyes turned to him. The old general struggled to his feet. Someone moved to help. He waved them off. This was something he needed to do standing. My name is General Robert Chen, retired. 38 years of service. I commanded MACVISOG operations in Cambodia and Laos. Black operations. The kind where men died and their families were told they'd been training accidents or equipment failures or simple bad luck. His voice carried, rough with age and sickness, but still strong enough to command attention. I know every person in this room believes in traditional doctrine because it's proven, because it works, because it's kept America safe for generations. He coughed, fought for breath. But I also know that traditional doctrine left 40 American soldiers to die in Laotian prisons because acknowledging them was politically inconvenient. I know that the man who tried to expose that truth, Marcus Torres, was murdered for it. And I know that I gave the order that led to his death. The room went dead silent. I didn't pull the trigger. Sergeant Major Frank Devlin did that. But I created the conditions. I told Devlin to make Marcus disappear, to scare him into silence. Devlin decided silence meant death. And I buried it because exposing the truth would have destroyed my career and the careers of everyone involved in abandoning those POWs. Chen's hands gripped the wheelchair, knuckles white. I've spent 12 years living with that choice, watching Marcus's daughter build what her father died for, knowing I could have stopped it, knowing I should have spoken up. But I was a coward. I chose my stars over my soul. He looked directly at Elena. Captain Torres, your father was right about everything, the training methods, the institutional corruption, the POWs, all of it. And the system killed him because being right is more dangerous than being wrong when billions of dollars are at stake. The observers shifted, uncomfortable. Marcus Torres spent his life building what his daughter has proven today. That soldiers are more than weapons. That transformation matters. that the system which discards people when they break is itself broken. Chen looked at Elena. Captain Torres, you didn't fail today. You succeeded at something more important than any evaluation. You proved your father was right. He slumped back, oxygen hissing. Stahl stepped forward. General Chen, with respect, that's irrelevant to today's assessment. No, Colonel, it's the only thing that's relevant. Stahl looked at the Pentagon liaisons. Sirs, I recommend we conclude this evaluation and proceed with shutdown procedures. One of the liaisons stood. Admiral Victoria Hayes. David recognized her from the briefing materials. The only fair voice in Pentagon leadership. Colonel Stahl, I'm placing this program under administrative review pending congressional investigation. Captain Torres, your operations will continue under current parameters until we complete a full assessment. General Chen's testimony regarding Marcus Torres' death will be heard by appropriate oversight committees. She looked at Keller's representative in the room, and General Keller will be asked to testify regarding his financial interests in defense contractors affected by this program. The room erupted. David watched it all unfold. Watched Stahl's certainty crack. Watched Elena's operator stand taller. Watched Michael capture every second on camera. And he thought about Marcus Torres, who died believing the truth didn't matter if no one listened. He'd been wrong. The truth always mattered. Sometimes it just took longer to be heard. 6 months after the demonstration that should have ended everything, David Harrigan stood in a cemetery in Arlington watching them lower another soldier into the ground. General Robert Chen, 82 years old, 4 months longer than the doctors had given him, long enough to testify before Congress, long enough to name every name and expose every lie, long enough to finally put down a burden he'd carried for 40 years. The honor guard folded the flag with mechanical precision, presented it to Chen's daughter, who accepted it with the kind of grace that came from a lifetime of military funerals. David had been to too many of these, knew the rhythm by heart, the rifles, the bugler playing taps, the way the morning light caught the rows of white headstones and made them look like they went on forever. Marcus Torres was buried 3 rows over. David could see the headstone from where he stood. Simple granite, name, rank, dates, nothing about murder, nothing about the truth that had taken 12 years to surface. But the new inscription, added after Chen's testimony, told part of the story. Died in service to truth, vindicated by time. Elena Torres stood beside David. She'd flown in from Wyoming for the funeral. Looked tired, good tired. The kind that came from work that mattered. He asked about you, she said quietly. At the end, wanted to know if you were still teaching. David nodded. What did you tell him? That you'd found something worth teaching for, finally. The service ended. People dispersed. Military brass who'd come because it looked good. Politicians who'd ridden the scandal to re-election. Journalists who'd won awards for breaking the story Michael had helped write. Michael himself stood at the edge of the cemetery, 31 years old, Pulitzer Prize sitting on his mantle at home. Father standing next to him at a funeral instead of across the country on a mission. Small victories. David walked over. You heading back to Los Angeles? Tomorrow. Got a follow-up piece on the congressional reforms. Michael looked at his father. You could come visit if you want. I'd like that. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close, something that looked like a door opening wider every time they talked. Progress. Elena joined them. Gentlemen, we need to talk about next week. The dedication, Michael asked. The dedication. Next week, the Pentagon was officially renaming the Silverstone facility. The Torres Harrigan Residence Institute, joint naming. David had argued against having his name attached. Elena had insisted. My father trusted you more than anyone, she'd said. You honored that trust when it cost you everything. Your name goes on the building. David had lost his pension in the investigation. Not court-martialed, but forced into retirement with reduced benefits. The price of choosing truth over orders. He'd been sleeping better than he had in 30 years. Turned out integrity was worth more than money. Who knew? They walked through Arlington together. 3 people connected by a dead man's legacy and the choice to honor it. How many operators now? David asked. 63, across 4 facilities. 89% success rate. Congressional funding secured for 5 years. Elena's voice carried quiet pride. We're training instructors now, teaching other programs how to implement resonance principles. Keller must love that. Elena smiled, grim. Keller's too busy with his court-martial to care. Devlin's already serving 15 years for Marcus's murder. The contractors who funded the cover-up are bankrupt, and Stahl got reassigned to a desk job in Kansas. Justice, Michael said. Close enough, Elena replied. They reached Marcus's grave. Elena touched the headstone. Gentle. The way you'd touch someone you loved who couldn't feel it anymore. He'd be proud of you, David said. He'd be furious I took so long. He'd understand. You did it right. That's what matters. Elena looked at him. You gave up everything for this. Your career, your pension, your reputation in circles that matter. I gained a relationship with my son. I helped build something that saves lives. I sleep without nightmares. David shrugged. That's not nothing. It's everything, Michael said quietly. They stood in silence. 3 generations of trying to do right in a system that made it hard. Finally, Elena spoke. Next week, dedication ceremony. I want you both there. And David, I want you to speak. Tell them what this means. What my father would have said if he'd lived to see it. David thought about that, about Marcus and Cambodia, and the moment when a 35-year-old sergeant had trusted an 18-year-old private to make a call that saved their lives. About 40 years of carrying that trust and trying to honor it. I'll be there, he said. The dedication ceremony took place on a Wednesday morning in Wyoming. Clear sky. Mountain air so clean it hurt to breathe. The kind of day Marcus would have chosen if he'd gotten to choose. 200 people assembled in the compound yard. Operators, both current and graduated. Pentagon brass who'd survived the scandal. Congressional Oversight Committee members. Media. And in the front row, sitting in folding chairs, 12 soldiers who'd been medically retired, psychologically discharged, or administratively separated before residents gave them a second chance. Griff was there, one eye, 60 years old, now leading the vision-impaired operator training program. Carver sat beside him, 52, deputy director of the Institute, published author. His book, Second Chances, A Soldier's Redemption, had spent 6 weeks on the Times bestseller list. Sharon Weiss wore colonel's insignia now, promoted, running the female operator integration program across all branches. Danny Ortiz, recovered from his dissociative episode, sat with his wife and daughter, back on active duty, proof that failure wasn't final. Elena stood at the podium. Behind her, a plaque waited to be unveiled. Bronze, permanent, the kind of thing that would outlast everyone present. My father died believing he'd failed, Elena began. Her voice carried across the compound. Strong, clear. He spent 40 years developing a methodology that could save soldiers' lives, and the institution he served decided that saving lives was less important than protecting budgets. Silence, attention, everyone listening. For 12 years, I believed the lie, that he'd been reckless, that the accident was his fault, that maybe he'd pushed too hard and paid the price. She paused. I was wrong. He was murdered, and the men responsible thought they could bury the truth along with him. She gestured to the rows of operators. But truth has a way of surviving. Because people like you refused to stay buried, you were discarded, written off, told you were broken beyond repair, and you proved them wrong. Every single day you proved them wrong. Applause, quiet at first, then building. Elena raised a hand. This institute isn't named for my father because he was perfect. He wasn't. He was stubborn and sometimes reckless, and he died before he could finish what he started. But it's named for him because he believed soldiers were worth more than the system gave them credit for. And it's named for Colonel David Harrigan because he honored that belief when everyone told him not to. She looked at David. Colonel, would you say a few words? David stood, walked to the podium on legs that felt older than they had 6 months ago, looked out at faces young and old, certain and scarred, all of them waiting. I'm not good at speeches, he said. Spent 34 years following orders, not questioning them. 34 years trusting that the mission was righteous because someone with rank said so. He gripped the podium, steadied himself. Marcus Torres saved my life 3 times. Cambodia, Laos, places that officially don't exist in operations that officially never happened. Each time he made a choice. Leave me behind and complete the mission, or risk everything to bring me home. Each time he chose me over the mission. David's voice roughened. For 40 years I thought that made him a good man. But I was wrong. It made him the right kind of man. The kind who understood that missions end but people endure. That completing the objective means nothing if you lose yourself doing it. He looked at the operators. You were all told you were done. That breaking meant you were useless. That the military had no room for soldiers who couldn't perform at peak efficiency. And someone decided that was a lie worth challenging. He gestured to Elena. Captain Torres didn't build this program because it was easy. She built it because it was necessary, because throwing away good people is wrong, because healing matters as much as fighting, maybe more. David's hands were shaking. Arthritis, age, the weight of finally saying things that should have been said decades ago. I gave up my pension for this, lost my rank, lost my reputation in circles that used to matter. And I'd do it again because I finally understand what Marcus tried to teach me 40 years ago. He met Elena's eyes. The mission isn't the mission. The people are the mission. Everything else is just details. He stepped back. The applause was louder this time. Real. Elena stood beside him. Together they pulled the cord. The plaque was revealed. Torres Harrigan Residence Institute, established 2026, dedicated to the principle that every soldier deserves a second chance. Below that, a quote attributed to Marcus Torres. The body isn't the obstacle, it's the instrument. And if you learn to play it, the music is incredible. David stared at the words. At his name permanently attached to something that would outlast him. And for the first time in 34 years, he felt like he'd earned it. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the photographs, and the obligatory handshakes with Pentagon brass who 6 months ago had wanted him court-martialed, David found himself alone on the observation deck. The mountains stood silent, indifferent. They'd been there before people invented war. They'd be there after people figured out peace. Footsteps behind him. He didn't turn. "You did good today, Dad." Michael stood beside him, looking out at the same view. Father and son, finally occupying the same space without the weight of 30 years crushing them. "Your article made this possible," David said. "Without that, we're just another program that got shut down quietly. Without you choosing truth, there's no article. We both know that." David nodded. "Your mother would have liked this. The Institute, what it stands for. She would have liked you standing up for something, finally." The word stung, but it was fair. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when she needed me. I know saying it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." Michael was quiet for a long time. Then carefully, "I spent 3 years hating you for that. Convinced you cared more about the uniform than your family. Maybe you did. Maybe the uniform was all you knew how to be. It was. But you took it off when it mattered. When Elena needed someone to believe in her and the whole system was against her, you took off the uniform and chose right." Michael turned to face him. "That doesn't erase missing Mom's funeral, but it means something. Maybe it means you finally learned what she tried to teach you." "What's that?" "That being a good soldier means knowing when to stop following orders." David felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "I'm buying a house," Michael said, "in Colorado, not far from here. There's a guest room, if you want it." "You asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you want to be part of my life. Real part. Not phone calls on holidays, not duty visits, actually present." David looked at his son, saw Margaret in his eyes. The same strength, the same refusal to accept less than truth. "I'd like that." "Good, because I'm getting married in 6 months, and I'd like my father to be there." The words landed like incoming fire, sudden, overwhelming. "You're getting married?" "Her name is Sarah. You met her briefly at the funeral. Journalist, smart, patient enough to deal with the fact that her future father-in-law is a controversial figure who made every major news outlet last year." David smiled, actually smiled. "I look forward to meeting her properly. She's tough. You'll like her. She doesn't take crap from anyone. Reminds me of Mom that way." They stood together as the sun moved across the sky, painting the mountains in shades of gold and shadow. Finally, Michael spoke again. "You think Marcus would be proud of what Elena built, of what you sacrificed to help her?" David thought about Marcus, about the man who'd carried him through a jungle, who trusted an 18-year-old's judgment over his own experience, who died because he wouldn't stop fighting for what was right. "I think Marcus would say we took too long, that we should have fought harder, faster, louder." David paused. "But yeah, I think he'd be proud if we fought at all." 3 months later, David Harrigan sat in a small cabin on the edge of the Institute property. Simple place, 1 bedroom, kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, window that looked out at mountains and sky. He'd bought it with what was left of his savings, enough for a quiet life. No pension meant working, so he taught advanced classes at the Institute 3 days a week, helped Carver develop curriculum, mentored young operators who reminded him of himself 40 years ago. It wasn't the retirement he'd planned. It was better. His phone buzzed. Message from Michael. "Dad, wedding venue confirmed, September 15th. Hope you're free." David typed back. "I'll be there." 3 words. Simple. But they meant more than any mission report he'd ever filed. He set down the phone, looked around the cabin, Saw photographs he'd hung on the walls. Margaret smiling at a beach in North Carolina before the cancer. Michael as a boy holding a fish he'd caught. Elena and her father standing at a range somewhere, both of them looking at the camera like they knew something the rest of the world didn't. And a new photo, taken at the dedication ceremony. David, Elena, Carver, Griff, Weiss, and a dozen other operators, all of them smiling, all of them proof that second chances weren't charity. They were justice. A knock at the door. David opened it to find Elena standing there with a folder. Bad time? Never a bad time. Coffee? Please. They sat at the small table. David poured coffee that tasted like every military installation he'd ever served on. Some habits died hard. What's in the folder? He asked. Expansion proposal. Pentagon wants to roll out resonance principles across all sniper training programs. They're asking for our input on implementation. David raised an eyebrow. 6 months ago, they wanted to shut us down. Now they want our help? Congressional oversight is a wonderful motivator. Elena smiled. But yes, they're asking, and I'm asking you to help me answer. What do you need? I need someone who understands traditional doctrine well enough to translate resonance principles into language conventional instructors will accept. Someone who's lived in both worlds. You're asking me to write training doctrine. I'm asking you to finish what my father started. He had the vision. You have the credibility. Together, we can actually change the system. David thought about that. About 34 years of following doctrine written by people who'd never questioned whether there was a better way. About the chance to write something different. I'm in, but Elena, I need to know. Are you okay? Really okay? She looked at him. Tired eyes, but clear. My father was murdered. The men responsible are in prison or disgraced. His work is validated and expanding. I'm building something that will outlast all of us. She paused. Am I okay? I don't know, but I am at peace. And that's more than I've had in 12 years. Good, that's good. They drank a coffee and talked through the proposal. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. And somewhere in those hours, David realized he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not leading men into combat, not following orders he didn't question, not sacrificing family for mission, just building something that mattered with people who understood the cost. That evening, David walked to Marcus's grave. They'd relocated his remains to a memorial cemetery on the Institute grounds. Small plot, mountain view, the kind of place Marcus would have chosen if he'd had the choice. David stood at the headstone, new inscription, same words as Arlington, but with an addition. Teacher, father, soldier, friend, his work continues. I hope we got it right, David said to the stone, to the memory, to whatever remained of Marcus Torres in the universe. I hope this is what you wanted. The wind moved through the trees, cold, clean, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the peaks. David took it as answer enough. He walked back to his cabin as the sun set. Orange and purple painting the sky, the kind of sunset that made you believe beauty still existed in a world that tried hard to convince you otherwise. Inside, his phone buzzed again. This time, a group message. Michael, Elena, Carver, Griff, Weiss, all of them confirming dinner tomorrow. All of them family, not by blood, but by choice. David typed back, I'll bring coffee. Someone responded, God help us all. He smiled, set down the phone, sat in the chair by the window and watched darkness claim the mountains. 58 years old, pension gone, career over, reputation in tatters among people who measured worth by rank and medals, and happier than he'd been in 34 years. Because he'd finally learned what Marcus had tried to teach him in a jungle in Cambodia when David was 18 and stupid and certain the uniform was all that mattered. People were the mission. Everything else was just noise. 1 year later, David stood in a church in Colorado watching his son get married. Michael wore a suit, dark blue, not black. Sarah had insisted, said black was for funerals and this was a celebration. Michael had laughed and agreed, and David had realized his son was marrying someone who made him laugh. That mattered more than he'd understood when he was young. The church was small, mountain chapel with windows that looked out at peaks still snow-capped in September. 50 people. Intimate. Most of them Sarah's family, a few of Michael's journalist friends, and from the military world, only Elena, Carver, Griff, and Weiss, the old guard, the ones who'd stood with David when standing meant risking everything. David sat in the front row, father of the groom, position of honor. Margaret should have been beside him, should have been crying happy tears and fussing over Michael's boutonniere and telling everyone about her baby boy who wasn't a baby anymore. Instead, David sat alone with a photograph in his jacket pocket. Margaret on their wedding day. 32 years ago, she'd been 26. Beautiful. Certain that marrying a soldier was romantic instead of lonely. He'd proved her wrong about the romantic part. Sarah was beautiful, smart. When she'd met David for the first time 3 months ago, she'd looked him in the eye and said, "Michael tells me you missed his mother's funeral for a mission. Don't miss this one. I don't care if the world's ending. You be here." David had promised he wouldn't. He'd kept that promise. Sitting here now, watching his son stand at the altar, watching Sarah walk down the aisle in a simple white dress that somehow made her look like everything good that still existed in the world, David felt something crack open inside his chest. Grief for Margaret, for the 30 years he'd wasted choosing missions over moments, for every anniversary missed, every birthday forgotten, every quiet Tuesday evening he could have been home for dinner but chose to stay late at the base because the paperwork was urgent and the work was important and someone had to do it. The work was never that important. He knew that now, but also joy, because Michael had found what David had lost, had chosen better, had learned from his father's mistakes instead of repeating them. The ceremony was short, simple vows, no elaborate speeches, just two people promising to choose each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," David's eyes were wet. Carver, sitting beside him, whispered, "She'd be proud, Margaret. She'd be real proud." David nodded, couldn't speak. After the ceremony, after the reception and the dancing and the cake cutting and all the rituals that marked transitions from one life to another, Michael found David on the venue's back patio. Stars filled the Colorado sky. Brilliant, countless. The kind of display city lights erased but mountain darkness revealed. "You okay, Dad?" David nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about your mom, wishing she could see this. She'd be happy, not just about the wedding, about you, about the fact that you're here. I should have been here for more things. You're here now. That's all that matters." Michael leaned against the railing beside his father. "Thank you for this, for everything the last year, for choosing to be part of my life. Thank you for letting me." They stood together, father and son, damaged by absence but healing through presence. Inside, music played. People danced. Sarah laughed at something Griff said. Life continued in its messy, beautiful, unstoppable way. Out here, two men stood in comfortable silence and let the past finally rest. "Dad," Michael said quietly, "Sarah's pregnant, 3 months. We haven't told anyone yet." The words took a moment to land. Pregnant, a grandchild, Margaret's grandchild. "That's wonderful," David managed. His voice cracked. "That's wonderful, son. We're naming her Margaret, if it's a girl, after Mom." David couldn't speak, could only nod, could only feel the weight of a name carrying forward. A legacy continuing, a woman who died feeling forgotten, being remembered by a granddaughter who would never meet her, but would carry her name and maybe, if David told the stories right, her spirit. "I'll tell her about her grandmother," David said. "All the stories, the real ones, not the sanitized versions. I'll tell her about how Margaret waited 30 years for me to come home, how she raised you mostly alone, how she was stronger than I ever was, how she deserved better than what I gave her. She'd want you to tell the happy stories too. I'll tell those too." David looked at his son. "But I won't lie. I won't pretend I was a good husband, because maybe if your daughter knows the truth, she'll choose better. She'll marry someone who understands that presence matters more than duty, that love is about showing up, not just promising to." Michael put a hand on his father's shoulder. "You're showing up now. That's not nothing. It's not enough, but it's what I have." They stood together as the stars wheeled overhead, as the music inside faded, as the night deepened into the kind of darkness that wasn't frightening, just honest. And David thought about the granddaughter he'd meet in 6 months, about the stories he'd tell her, about the man he'd been and the man he was trying to become, and the difference between the two. He'd been a soldier who followed orders. He was trying to be a grandfather who chose presence. The second one was harder, but worth it. 2 years after the dedication ceremony, David Harrigan received a letter, handwritten, postmarked from Washington. He opened it carefully. It was from the Secretary of Defense. "Colonel Harrigan, your pension has been reinstated at full rank. Additionally, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for your role in exposing corruption and advancing critical military training reforms. A ceremony will be held at the Pentagon on November 15th. Your presence is requested." David read it twice, set it down, stared out the window at mountains that had become more home than any place he'd lived in 34 years of service. The medal meant nothing. The recognition was 40 years too late. But the pension meant he could stop working if he wanted, could rest. He picked up the phone, called Elena. "They're giving me back the pension and a medal." "That's good. You deserve it." "I don't want it." Silence on the other end. Then carefully, "What do you want?" "I want to keep teaching. I want to keep building this. I want to matter in a way that doesn't require a ceremony." "Then that's what you'll do. The medal's just brass and ribbon anyway." "Exactly." He hung up, wrote a response to the Secretary of Defense. "Thank you for the recognition. I'll accept the pension reinstatement as it will allow me to continue volunteering at the Torres Harrigan Institute. I respectfully decline the medal. My service was simply correcting mistakes I should never have made. That doesn't deserve recognition. That's just basic integrity." He mailed it, went back to work. 3 days later, the Pentagon called. The secretary wanted to talk. David declined. He had classes to teach. 5 years after Marcus Torres' murder was exposed, David Harrigan sat in a VA hospital room holding the hand of Roy Carver. Cancer, stage 4. The same disease that had taken General Chen. The same disease that seemed to hunt soldiers who'd breathed too much burn pit smoke and carried too much war. Carver's breathing was labored. Oxygen mask covering most of his face, but his eyes were clear when he looked at David. "Tell me true, Colonel. Did we do enough?" David thought about the Institute, about the 300 operators who'd graduated, about the training reforms spreading across all branches, about the lives saved by people who'd been told they were done. "We did more than enough, Roy. You did more than enough." Carver smiled behind the mask. "My boys, you think they'd be proud?" "I think they'd be honored to call you their father." Carver's eyes closed, opened. "Tell Elena. Tell her. Keep going. Don't stop." "I will. And Colonel, thank you for giving an old broken soldier something to fight for." "You were never broken, Roy, just waiting for someone to remember you were worth saving." Carver squeezed his hand once. Then the grip loosened. The monitors changed their rhythm. Medical staff entered. David stepped back. Let them work. But he knew, had seen it too many times not to know. Roy Carver died at 14:30 on a Tuesday afternoon in October. 57 years old. Husband, father, soldier, teacher. The funeral was at the Institute. Full military honors. Flag folded with precision. Taps played by a bugler who'd learned from Carver himself. David delivered the eulogy. Roy Carver lost both his sons to war, lost his purpose to grief, and found both again because someone believed discarded soldiers were worth saving. He spent his last years teaching others what he'd learned. That breaking isn't the end. That healing is possible. That second chances aren't charity, they're human rights. David looked out at the assembled crowd. Operators Carver had trained, families he'd helped heal, a system he'd helped change. He asked me if we'd done enough, and the answer is yes, because enough isn't measured by how much we accomplished. It's measured by how many people we lifted up along the way. They lowered Carver into the ground next to Marcus Torres, two soldiers who'd believed the same thing and paid different prices for it. But both of them vindicated. Both of them remembered. Both of them proof that the fight mattered even when you didn't live to see the victory. David saw Dr. James Parks standing at the edge of the gathering. The psychiatrist looked older, thinner. He'd served 18 months in federal prison for unauthorized data transmission. Walked out 3 weeks ago. After the ceremony, Park approached Elena. "Captain, Colonel." Elena studied him. "James, I wanted to pay respects. Roy helped me understand something during my evaluation. That good intentions don't justify bad methods." Park's voice was steady, honest. "I'm sorry for all of it." Elena nodded slowly. "You were trying to honor the dead, I understand that. But you endangered the living to do it." "I know. I've had 18 months to think about it." He paused. "I'm opening a civilian practice, veteran psychiatric care, specializing in operators with PTSD and dissociative disorders. If you ever need a consultant, someone who understands both the science and the cost, I'm available." Elena looked at David. He gave a small nod. "We'll be in touch, James. And James, thank you for caring, even when you were wrong about how." Park's eyes glistened. He shook their hands and walked away. David watched him go. "You're going to hire him back." "Eventually, maybe. He made mistakes, but he made them for the right reasons. That's worth something." 10 years after David Harrigan chose truth over orders, he stood at the Institute's 10th anniversary ceremony. 68 years old. Arthritis worse. Eyes weaker. body failing in all the ways bodies did when you asked too much of them for too long. But mind clear, purpose sharp, life full. 10 years, a decade, long enough for wounds to scar, for bitterness to fade, for choices to prove their worth or reveal their folly. In those 10 years, David had learned what it meant to live without the uniform. The first year had been the hardest. He'd wake at 0500 out of habit, reach for fatigues that weren't there, listen for reveille that didn't play. The absence of structure had felt like falling, but slowly he'd built something new, a routine that belonged to him, not the military. Coffee at 0600, but in his cabin, not a mess hall. Morning walk through the mountains, breathing air that no drill sergeant had ever screamed through. Teaching classes where students called him David, not Colonel, and the respect was earned daily instead of demanded by rank. He'd learned to cook, badly at first, then competently. Michael had visited that first Christmas and taught him how to make Margaret's meatloaf. They'd burned the first attempt, laughed about it, made it again. Small moments, meaningless to anyone else. Everything to David. He'd learned to be a grandfather. Emma had been born in year 2. Tiny, perfect, with Margaret's eyes and Michael's stubborn chin. She'd grabbed David's finger with her whole hand, and he'd understood, finally, what he'd been fighting for all those years. Not missions, not objectives, not geopolitical abstractions. This, a tiny hand trusting that the world was safe because someone older and bigger promised to keep it that way. He'd learned to grieve properly. For Margaret. For the 30 years he'd given the military when he should have given them to her. For the moments missed and the promises broken and the love expressed in absence instead of presence. And he'd learned to forgive himself. Not completely, never completely, but enough to keep moving. Enough to understand that regret was meant to change you, not destroy you. 10 years of learning what it meant to be human instead of soldier. 10 years of discovering that the second life was harder but richer than the first. 10 years of finally getting it right. Elena stood at the podium, 42 now, colonel's rank, running not just the institute but the entire military's resonance integration program. 10 years ago, my father's work was considered pseudoscience. The operators in this room were considered broken, and the man standing beside me was told he had to choose between his career and his integrity. She looked at David. He chose integrity, and because of that choice, we're here. 8 facilities, 700 graduates, 92% success rate, congressional funding secured through 2040, and most importantly, a cultural shift in how the military treats soldiers who break. She paused. Some people fought that change. General Keller is serving his 8th year in Leavenworth. Sergeant Major Devlin died in prison last year. And Colonel Richard Stahl, who designed the evaluation meant to destroy us, retired quietly to teach high school JROTC in Kansas. He sends me a Christmas card every year. Last year said, "You were right. I was afraid." I consider that progress. Applause, long and genuine. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The story is Griff, who lost an eye and found purpose. Carver, who lost sons and found family. Weiss, who lost sleep and found peace. And hundreds of others who were told they were done and proved everyone wrong. Elena stepped aside. "Colonel Harrigan, would you like to say a few words?" David approached the podium, looked out at faces young and old, saw Michael in the front row, saw Sarah beside him, saw his granddaughter 3 years old playing with a toy, saw a future he'd almost missed by choosing the uniform over the life. "I'm not good at speeches," he said, "but I've learned a few things in 68 years. He gripped the podium. "I learned that following orders is easy, questioning them is hard, and sometimes the hard thing is the only honorable thing. I learned that the system isn't the mission. People are the mission. And any institution that forgets that deserves to be challenged. I learned that second chances aren't for the weak. They're for the brave, because it takes more courage to heal than to pretend you're not broken." He paused, found Michael's eyes. "And I learned that being a good soldier means knowing when to put down the rifle and pick up the life you've been too afraid to live." His voice roughened. "Marcus Torres died for this. Roy Carver died for this, and they didn't die in vain. Because every operator who walks through these doors, every soldier who finds purpose after being discarded, every family that gets their loved one back, that's their legacy." David stepped back. "Keep going. Don't stop. Make every sacrifice matter." The applause washed over him. He barely heard it. He was thinking about Marcus, about Carver, about Margaret and the funeral he'd missed and the wedding he'd attended, about choices and consequences in the long road from being a soldier who followed orders to being a man who questioned them. It had taken 68 years, but he'd gotten there. That evening, David sat in his cabin, alone, content. His phone buzzed. Message from Michael. Dad, bringing family by tomorrow. Want to introduce Emma to the ranges. She keeps asking about Grandpa's work. David smiled. Type back. I'll be here. He set down the phone, looked at the photographs on the wall. Margaret, Michael, Elena, Marcus, Carver, Griff, Weiss. All the faces that had shaped his journey from soldier to teacher to something that didn't have a name but felt like home. Outside, the mountains stood silent. They'd been there for millions of years. They'd be there for millions more. But David Harrigan had been here, had made a choice, had honored a promise, had helped build something that would outlast him. And when they laid him in the ground someday, probably not far from Marcus and Carver, his headstone would carry words that finally meant something. He'd decided on them already. Teacher, father, soldier. He chose right when it mattered. David closed his eyes, let the weariness take him, and dreamed of jungles and mountains and all the places where broken soldiers learned to be whole again. The mission was complete. The legacy secure. The people saved. Everything else was just details. I spent 3 months researching military sniper programs to tell David's story right. What struck me wasn't the impossible shots or the conspiracy. It was the 52-year-old father who lost both sons and found purpose again. The 56-year-old shooter with one eye who refused to stay broken. These weren't superheroes. They were men like you and me, told they were done, who chose to prove everyone wrong. Question for you veterans out there. Have you ever felt like the system you served forgot about you the moment you couldn't serve anymore? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this one moved you, there's more where this came from. Hit subscribe. Next week's story is about a Vietnam POW who waited 40 years to tell the truth. You won't want to miss it. What part of David's journey hit you hardest? The father-son reconciliation? Carver's sacrifice? Let's talk below.